around, but I suppose that might be to do with the time of the year rather than anything else. So welcome to the July meeting of the Children, Young People and Lifelong Learning Committee. And this will be the, as you know, the final meeting of this committee. I was just asking Colin, it's more or less exactly 4 years since it's been in existence. So the next meeting will be the Education and Learning Committee in its new form. So can I just remind members that this meeting will be recorded and subsequently made available to the public for listening. So before we start the meeting proper, Ros, you want to say something about an event in Stranraer?
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for allowing the time for this. I just wanted to take a moment of your time to draw your attention to the World Skiffy Championships that's happening in Stranraer as we speak. It's the most incredible event, and those of us that have been involved in the last 2 days are completely overwhelmed by the number of people that are in Stranraer. It's actually one of the best things I've ever seen anywhere, never mind in Stranraer itself. I think it's the precursor to many things that will happen on our waterfront down in Stranraer, and I just wondered if we could acknowledge today the work that has been done by a small number of volunteers to pull this off. Absolutely incredible. And I also understand that today is Duck Day, and I searched my house to try and find a duck to bring along to the committee meeting, but unfortunately I just found a fish and 2 LGBT ducks who are sitting there. So just to acknowledge the event, the work and the fun that is happening, I'd like you to stand on your feet and clap those people that have pulled this off. Thank you.
Thank you, Ros. So we move on to the agenda items now, and yes, certainly good luck with the Skiffy Championships. So we move to item 2, which should be actually item 1, SEDERUNT and apologies. Claire?
Thank you, Chair. We've got 16 members present this morning. Apologies from Councillors Fairbairn, Giusti and McComb. Councillor Tate not present. We've also got George Jameson here, Parent Council Rep, and Sam Scobie here, Church Rep.
Thanks, Claire. SEDERUNT and apologies. Do you have any declarations of interest? Okay, so if we move on to item 3 on page 9, minutes of the previous meeting, the 28th of May 2019. Are we in agreement that that's an accurate recording? Thank you. So if we move on to item 4 on page 17, Children, Young People and Lifelong Learning Services Revenue Budget 2018-19 outturn. And this is the final outturn for 2018-19, which returned a small underspend of £129,000. Members are asked to note the achievement of agreed savings, note the utilisation of policy development allocations, and agree the transfer of £129,000 to service reserves, and note the DSM reserves of £1,432,000. And we have Gillian Brightson, Janet Sutton and Angela Patterson to speak to this. Is there anything you want to add to the report?
Nothing to add to the report, Chair.
Members? Adam?
Thanks, Chair. It's just in Appendix 4, obviously I see that we are transferring 129k to service reserves, and it's an issue I've had with all committees that I sit on, that instead of sort of saying, you know, we're going to allocate it to this service reserve line, it's just, you know, Council have been presented with an appendix similar to this for each committee and saying, you know, this is now the whole service reserve. So, you know, it's an issue that I've had and I haven't had any luck. You know, we should really be, as we have done in previous years, identifying exactly which service reserve lines we're allocating this money to, because obviously, you know, the recommendation is to agree the transfer to support identified initiatives. Well, you know, I don't actually see where we're identifying and what service reserve line we're actually putting that underspend into. So I would appreciate if we could actually identify exactly where we are allocating this 129k, you know, so that we are transparent to the public.
Thanks. I think, Councillor, well, I mean, we would be able to do that in the future, but clearly on this occasion, in transferring it and looking at the overall need in terms of reserve, in terms of what would be needed to make all these initiatives happen, that money was added into that pot. If you're looking for us to do that in the future, in terms of very specifically, we can do that, or indeed we could look particularly at these and brief you offline in terms of which particular one is the one that we think is most important.
I mean, I'm quite happy for that information to be shared, but, you know, when I look back at previous reports, you know, not just in the time I've been a councillor, but in the entire, you know, time that these, you know, these outturn reports have been provided, you know, there is usually a sort of this was the service reserves at the end of the last financial year. This is where we've allocated any underspends that have occurred, and so therefore the total service reserves now is, and it's been identified that this 129k has been allocated to X, Y, and Z. I mean, it's an issue that I've had across all committees, you know, where there hasn't been that transparency that has been in previous years. So I would appreciate, you know, to actually have that identified either today or offline, and for that to be taken back for future reports.
Ian?
I was going to bring up a similar point, but it was under recommendation 2.4, where it actually was, I think, where Adam's picking up on that allocation, where it goes. There's an agenda item later on. It is very broad, so Appendix 4 is very broad, and it's not specific in regards to where the money's going. And there's some of them there, I think, that probably won't be here next year, like the DG1 and in particular, DG1 actually. But there's a large sum of money there. But later on, we've got, is it item number 6, I think, in regards to the P1 to 7 composite classes, or is it 7, sorry, composite classes across here, and there's a funding being applied from a policy development from somewhere else, from what I can see there. You would have thought that kind of money would have went, if it's within the education budget, it would have went like so there. So it's away from Appendix 4, but it was in the same train of thought, I think, was what Adam's kind of down the line. I think if we should be spending education money on education, rather than using policy development money from elsewhere, if we possibly can. So.
Ivor?
Thank you, Chair. Similar sort of question. We're told that we actually have 1.61 million in earmark committed CYPLL service reserves on the appendix, yet we're being asked to put another 129,000 in, because that's what the recommendations say. Can we put it in? But it states there at the end of the financial year we had 1.61, unless you've spent some of that money and you're needing to top it up. The other thing was DG1 reopening costs. How long will we carry that, and will that be actually able to come back into the centre so that in future years or within education or wherever we won't have to actually make savings, but we can utilise this funding?
Stephen?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, in terms of the DG1 costs, they're all one-off costs for this current financial year, and should there be any underspend in that, they will be retained within the council. The kind of breakdown at the moment is, and they're all one-off costs, £100,000 that was identified within the report that went to CYPLL in January. There's 40,000 against equipment, 300,000 against IT equipment, 50,000 for the top floor of DG1, and another 50k for furnishings, and that's all the one-off cost that would see through the first year operation.
Ivor?
So I take it that money will be spent now because of the fact that we're opening on Monday?
It's money that will be spent during the year. Some of it hasn't been, some expenditure hasn't been incurred yet, but I don't have the specific breakdown of that yet.
And the other point, it says at the end of the year we had 1.61 reserves or commitments. So I take it we had that money in the fund, and then we're being asked, because we've got an underspend that wasn't in reserves, to put it into reserves, is that additional money going in, and under the rules, what is it for? Because it quite clearly states in 314 you have to have a specific purpose for that money to be put into reserves.
Jan?
The 1.6 million includes the 129,000 that we're asking members to approve today.
Katie?
Thank you, Chair. I'll just touch briefly on that point before I ask my question that I had. So, looking at Appendix 4, it doesn't actually have a date. Is this the reserves for 18-19? And at the end of the financial year, do we get a breakdown of how it was actually spent? Because we've got this figure, which is fine, I have no issue with that, and I have no issue with the fact that the service can retain up to 2% of the budget. I'm not sure what the maximum reserves the Directorate can hold, but I'm aware it's 2%, which is fine. But at what point do we get a breakdown to say, yep, these were the reserves for this financial year, and this is how we spent them? It's maybe not appropriate for today, but at what point will we get that information? And the question I had was actually in terms of page 18 on 3.4. There's mention of external funding that we've received, which has offset the costs incurred. What is the external funding? Who gave us that external funding, and for what purpose? Because it mentions external funding, but it doesn't actually say who it was from. And if we've been given it, let's acknowledge where we got that money from, please.
Certainly something, if it is specific external funding with relation to early learning and childcare, or if it's additional support needs, I can certainly go back and establish exactly where that is from in 3.4, Councillor. I'm sorry, I'm not sure to which budget that exactly refers.
And will we get a breakdown of the reserves at the end of each financial year? Has that happened in the past? Will we get that in the future?
Jan?
I can take that forward, and I'll ask the question and come back to you.
Willie?
Yeah, Chair, could I first concur with the remarks made by Ross at the beginning of the meeting, and Stranraer is definitely on the world map. At times I feel it's known Dumfries and Galloway's, but however, we are on the world map through the skiffies and more to come. So in that respect, as I say, I want to concur with the remarks made. As the new kid in the block, Chair, I'm looking at this and I'm looking at 3.14 through to 3.16, where we seem to have 1,610,000 in reserves. And if I'm correct, that will be added to by a further 129,000. And I see Colin shaking his head. Well, he maybe can answer it before I go any further, because if you're looking at where we would like to spend it, I think you've heard me speak at full council in terms of our additional support needs and how we've taken 706,000 away from that, and I'll speak at a further item in the agenda. Then I'm sure there are places that we can put any surplus, any reserves that are held, because I don't see it in the Appendix 2. And I just smile when I look at 3.18 and wonder if I'm in the same place as many of the parent councils that I attend. All DSM balances are within the guidelines, which I'm sure they are, and head teachers continue to be prudent and manage finances carefully. I don't think that the parent councils would note that it's not being managed carefully, but that they do need that extra money in their devolved management. So, I just wonder at the report.
Colin?
Thanks, Councillor. What I think I'm able to confirm for you is that the 129,000 is part of the 1.61 million, as I understand from colleagues in finance. And that 1.6 million has been set out in terms of initiatives and needs in terms of the next year. The slight further complication, of course, is that we're disaggregating budgets from CYPLL, and that's why it's a wee bit more complicated than normal, because you've got social abuse, social work, abuse inquiry, national abuse inquiry, social work out of hours, then you've got seed funding, then you've got DG1, So that's what's made it a little more complicated on this occasion, and I think we would be very happy to go back after this and confirm to members in detail around the questions that you've asked there. What I can say is that against an enormous budget, we've come in 129,000 below. We've identified significant need for next year, and that's been included in the reserve going forward, and that's what that links to. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, could I thank Colin for his explanation and clarification. And as a pretty simple person, then I would welcome that coming forward, because if we're going to need it, then maybe there are those within here today that may see other needs that have been identified, and I've only flagged up one, and I'll speak on that in the future in terms of additional support needs for kids who we may be failing as an educational authority.
Dick?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, the Coastal Rowing Skiff Championships, the World Champs, it is a regional thing, because Ann Harbour Group are there supporting the festival. They're providing safety boat cover, and we've got two coastal rowing boats taking part of it. We'd produced the first coastal rowing boats in the area, and it is really a really good thing for the region that we're taking part in that and organising that. The points on this report, I think most of the things are covered. The balances in this service and other services are concerned. Should we be holding so many balances when our budget's so tight? And I think I've already asked for that to be in the first agenda of the Finance and Procurement Committee. So hopefully that will come forward. Yeah, the thing that Councillor Hagman highlighted on 3.4 about the external funding, I have starred that question. It's quite a tantalising report. It tells you the external funding, but we don't get the full story, and what this external funding is. So the question is, the DSMs the schools allowed to hold up to 2.5%, and that is that a realistic figure? Should we cut it, or is it working quite well, that figure?
2.5% has been a long-standing understanding, and is also in line with the national guidance. There's certainly been new, Scottish Government have recently published just last week, new guidance on DSM, and we were closely involved in leading that work, because we've had a fully devolved staffing budget now for some years. So 2.5% I feel is realistic. If a school wishes to go above that and has long-term planning, then they can come and talk to us about that. We're certainly not in the business of pulling money back from schools if they want to have prudent long-term planning for their investment.
Adam?
Thanks, yeah. I appear to have opened a bit of a can of worms. I just wanted, to try and pull it back together. We could maybe reflect in the recommendations, that we will receive further information on the the allocation of the reserves. Although I would just like to say, that there's been a lot of discussion about the DSM funding, 2.5%. I'm sure that councils here wouldn't want to actually tie head teachers' hands by saying that they cannot retain some money, because actually in some cases, if a head teacher wants to buy new textbooks, they will need to save up their DSM money for a number of years and able to actually buy those textbooks. So I think, while we can say, 2.5% budgets are tight, I think that we maybe actually want to think about what the consequences of those are, and it may mean that actually we force head teachers to spend money in order to keep it, instead of actually making that long-term planning for resources within schools. And I think as well, I hear what Councillor Brodie is saying about, reserves, but I think that we have to remember that, £1.6 million worth of reserves in the CYPLL budget is a very small percentage. And I don't think there will be anyone in this room who will say that, we should spend the nearly £500,000 that's allocated to obligations that may fall on this council as a result of the National Abuse Inquiry, and that we would not want to spend that money now and actually enforce cuts in future years because we need to pull together some money to carry out our responsibilities to the victims who will be involved in that inquiry. So I think that we have to be very careful about some of the things we say, because we think it's a good soundbite.
Oh.
Thanks, Councillor. If we could just pick up on the DSM reserves. I think we've always prided ourselves in the region in terms of our head teachers' prudence. They've always known certainly for the 11 years that I've been here, that it's unlikely that we would suddenly grab back any money from them, because that is the big danger, that head teachers would then spend money at the last minute on things that weren't worthwhile. There have been occasions when it's been above 2.5% and head teachers have given us a good explanation and they've been allowed to carry that forward further. At the same time, at a time when life is difficult for the council in terms of funding, then we're also pleased to note that the DSM reserves in schools is coming down somewhat, because we are asking head teachers not to hold back for the sake of it either, and we're trying to get a balance there. And you'll note in 3.17 that has been a reduction overall in reserves, but just again to reassure you that head teachers are not under pressure to spend on things that they don't need.
Yeah, I think it does in tie with empowerment of head teachers, you know, the development of responsibility to the local schools. Ian?
Thank you, Chair. Can of worms was getting open anyways, I think, but Councillor Wilson's quite right to be moving on in order to make progress through the recommendations. So just a slightly different point. So I noticed on, I will allude to a later report where it comes back to where it's P1 to 7, the budget savings template, actually, I will address in that. And it's when I was looking through this, so just to put it into context, so on page 25, we've got the delivery of agreed savings for 18-19 past, and as part of that, the staffing reprofiling through the teacher at early retirement, which is £810,000 worth of saving, which is great, and wish these people all the best. But as part of the methodology being applied later on, so there's Cumbertrees under pressure and there's Springfield under pressure, and we're using two different methodologies. So one's using full-time equivalent teachers, the other one's using a full-time equivalent teacher and a probationer. So I'm just wondering, so the question really, to try and put that into context, what impact is that saving having? It's been saved, is that having an impact, positive or negative, in regards to the future delivery of the educational services? So when I'm seeing things like that, I'm thinking, okay, are we getting rid of letting teachers go? We actually need, we haven't used probationers. That's the underlying question, is what I'm really saying. So just clarity in regards to that.
Julian?
Just, if I could make a general point, philosophically, we've been very keen overall over the last 5, 6, 7, 10 years, in fact, but certainly since Refresh started about 6 or 7 years, to have as much turnover as we can, where it's appropriate, and where teachers are maybe at a stage where they're ready to finish, giving them the opportunity, making sure that we've got enough places for all the probationers and sometimes for new staff to be appointed. And that's been relatively successful, because not only has it been cost effective, we've had a lot of turnover in our schools, and we've got, I think, a good balance between really experienced staff and new staff coming through. And I think philosophically we've been keen to do that in the past. John Thins here, John is the person who has headaches if we don't have enough staff. And we had a lot, you know, you've got to recognise, Ian, that we actually had something like 90 requests, I think, for ERVS, and actually only gave out 25 allocations there. So we always just try and balance it in terms of what we think we'll need in the future, and not offering too many people the opportunity to go. Okay.
Ivor?
Chair, it's with regard to the overspend in social work services. It was 412,000. If we hadn't used the reserves, which it says in there, the significant amount of CYPLL service reserves, where would that have stood looking forward? Are we going to have a significant issue there in future years that we need to address? Because, you know, if we use 300,000, then we're 700,000 short, or was it more than that? Could you just remind me? I didn't look it up before I came today.
Angela?
Yes, Councillor Hislop, there's work going on at the moment because the projected overall ongoing pressure in social work is in the region of £1 million currently. So we're working with finance colleagues to formulate an action plan around that, and we'll be taking a report to the new social work committee in the new diet of committees after the recess. There are significant concerns and significant areas of pressure that we need to share with members going forward.
Just generally, I mean, given that the projection is we're going to face another £32 million worth of savings over the next 2 years, you know, that is going to be a massive job, and the demographics in Dumfries and Galloway with an ageing population. Adam?
I think Ivor raises an important point now, but I think it's not reflected in these papers, but we did, through social work and subsequently policy and resources, at some point in the last financial year, allocate a sort of social work fund of about £1 million. And my understanding is it was discussed at Policy and Resources a couple of weeks ago, and that money hasn't actually been spent. I'm guessing with this report that money is actually sitting centrally, but there is actually an allocation there in the reserves for social work. I just wonder if we can get that confirmed.
Yes, Councillor Wilson, there was a social work reserve of £1 million which hadn't been touched or called upon for the 5 years since it was in existence. It needed to be accessed during 2018-19, as you say. That was agreed at Policy and Resources. That reserve has actually been reinstated as part of the outturn position for the overall council. The likelihood is that there will be a further request from social work to access that during this financial year as a result of the ongoing pressure.
Finally, Ian, then we'll move to the recommendation.
Thank you. Just a small point, Chair, just for clarity in regards to, so I think this is probably the last SIPL meeting, to my understanding, on the back of the full council decision. We moved to early education, and learning. So we'll look at a lot of this information here. It's retrospective, obviously, we're reflecting, but I think that'll be changed considerably, or quite a bit of that'll be changed. So like the DG1, so on will be moved. When will we see a report to reflect that, to see exactly the level of delegation, the budget lines and so on and so forth? It'll be interesting to see that as we go forward. Will it be at the first meeting of the Education and Learning Committee?
Yeah, I think that was agreed at full council in terms of the delegation. So that has been agreed by full council. I mean, it could be reiterated at the next meeting of the Education and Learning Committee. But obviously that will be in the frontispiece, as it is in all of these, as to what the responsibility and delegations are.
Certainly, I would confirm that the budget and performance reports are likely to be a bit shorter.
Move to the recommendation. Can we note 2.1, note 2.2, note 2.3, agree 2.4, note 2.5, and there was a suggestion about an additional recommendation, was it? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, I've got a note here to receive further information on the allocation of reserves.
That was Katie's. Yeah.
Did we not say that we were going to get a report on the external funding as well?
I think that was more a notification, so presumably that can be emailed out to all members in the form of a brief.
That's fine.
Okay.
Happy with that.
So moving on to agenda item 5 on page 31, the Director's end of year assessment of the CYPLL Business Plan 2018 to 2023 performance. This is the Director's assessment of the CYPLL Business Plan 2018 to 2023, the period April 2018 to March 2019. This is the first full end-of-year iteration of this report. This comprehensive report illustrates the achievements made by CYPLL over the past year in pursuit of the Council's key priorities and commitments. Members will note that as proposed under the new Chief Officer structure, service plans will be presented by heads of service after the summer recess, and these will replace the current Directorate Business Plan model. Gillian Bradson and Julian Greaveson are here today to answer any questions members may have on the content of the report. Is there anything you want to add to the report?
Nothing further.
No. Members? Willie?
Yeah, Chair, could I hone in on the youth beats and the tremendous success of that, and maybe to note just and applaud, if you like, the generosity of the people that attended, because, you know, there was wagon loads of food and all types of goods that were collected, and that's been dispersed throughout the whole of Dumfries and Galloway. So I think we should applaud, you know, that generosity from the people, and I'm sure Sam will pick up in his food bank with the amount of stuff that's still in the community reuse shop. So I think we should recognise that just the way that people responded to others who are less fortunate and require assistance. Also, on that, and I know Mark Malloy is on holiday, but I've made contact with him, and it's in an attempt to try and emulate the success of Youth Beat, and this is again projecting into the future that Ross spoke of in terms of Stranraer, and it's Stranraer FC's 150th anniversary next year, and what they would like to do for 2021, so they get plenty of time, is to try and emulate something along the lines of Youth Beat in Stair Park. So it's maybe to draw on the experience of the education and those who are involved, particularly Mark Malloy, to see how we can pull that off in Stranraer as well, as part of that whole celebrations and for the youth at the other end of the region. So I'm just putting down a precursor to see how we can draw on your experience and how we can bring that off, maybe in a smaller scale, but nevertheless along the same lines in Stair Park in Stranraer to celebrate Stranraer FC's 150th anniversary.
Jim?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, Mark's back later this week, so I'm happy to bring that to his attention, and like to say to try and tie in with the 150th anniversary and see what ideas could be brought forward.
Ros?
Thanks, Chair. I'm looking on page 80 at the percentage of staff who've completed the annual performance development review. This is very frustrating. We seem to be not managing it, and certainly in my social work career, I personally revamped the with a team of people looking at how to improve PDRs across the region for staff. It's incredibly important, but since I've sat in this seat, we've been told that they're just not being recorded. Well, as a manager, I used to sit and do it with the employee on the computer at the time, so I just don't understand why things aren't being recorded. And are we just putting staff under too much pressure to try and do these PDRs? What is it that we can do? I'm reluctant to give people more work to do, but do we need to look at this again? It's really frustrating.
June?
Thank you, Chair. And I also have sat in this seat and given as good a response I could do for many years on the fact that we tend to drop down to between 75 and 85%. And I've repeatedly said I've never had any of the 3,400 staff come to me and highlight a concern that they have not had their PDR. But I do recognise the importance of good management and people feeling that they have suitable and sufficient management and support within their workplace. So that there is a recording issue in schools, and there is an issue that the total number of staff includes supply staff, casual staff, and staff who are not always have a base. I think, given the capacity on managers, I think it would be prudent to look at the thresholds in terms of what our expectations are, and that certainly raised that with heads of service recently. But again, that's not a decision for me to take, but one I would take back to my colleague heads of service. What do we expect of management activity, given the reducing resources that we have?
Ian?
Start with a couple of points, Chair, if that's okay. On page 38, looking at improving flexibility of early education by aligning the nurse of the day with the school day and working better with childcare partners. Just can you remind me what that project was again, please? I think I know what that is, just so I'm absolutely clear, I know in mind. And on the page 40, it's improvement project, protect and safeguard children through fast, effective information sharing and decision making through the implementation of the multi-agency safeguarding hub. Again, and very interesting in regards to that. So the scrutiny, Audit Risk Scrutiny Committee and IGB for that matter have been doing a bit of work around about information sharing, how it works, so on and so forth. And we've actually got a workshop tomorrow with a report to the Audit Risk Committee of the Integrated Joint Board. It's away from here, but it's on the same subject matter because the two are interlinked. I just wonder, it seems to be that they're doing something that the rest of the council and health aren't doing. I just wonder, because the targets, they're reaching 100% performance. Why are they working so effectively is the question that went through my mind compared to what the rest of the council seems to be in NHS at this point in time.
Yeah, through yourself, Chair. Just in terms of the multi-agency safeguarding hub, the 100% is the position for the project of establishing that. It's not about the performance of that, and it's, if that makes sense, just for clarity. So the adult MASH and the child MASH are established and at 100% in that project, just for absolute clarity. The information sharing agreements and data protection connotations are reflected right across social work and indeed the council. So we're all in a similar position.
And in terms of the first question, it's a similar piece of work. That the priority was, or the task was given to us to look at improving the flexibility. We went out to full consultation. We spoke with parents. We asked parents how they wanted their early learning and childcare provision delivered and at what times the expansion should, in reality, be, so you're not dropping off, picking up kids at different times of the school day. So we have investigated that, and that project is now completed, and we brought the phasing and the timings back to members on a regular basis.
Katie?
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to reiterate what's been said in terms of the great work done by the Youth Services team. They do get lots of praise, but I think that praise is well deserved. What I would like to do is reiterate what I said in full council in terms of our single-use plastic policy, which we have and which I am not seeing implemented. And the youth team deliver a whole host of events which are fantastic, and they're well received and they're very popular, and I think they're doing incredible work, but they don't appear to be complying with our own policy on single-use plastics. I'm aware we've got the LGBT gathering, I think, in the next couple of weeks, the regional gathering. So just to confirm that we are now adhering to our own policy on that, I would hope we are. In terms of the report in front of us today, I'm just a little bit concerned that there's not an exception report on page 67 in terms of the percentage of RIDDER investigations completed and the report to HSE. Now, in the past, the numbers have been acceptable and good. If I look at the reported, it's gone from 100% reporting in 16-17 down to 88 in 17-18, but we seem to be going down to 50%. So there's a slide going down there. So it's just what are we doing to ensure that that actually goes back up rather than down. And I just wanted to also note, we've got in the document before us on page 93 about the successes and achievements of some of the key successes across our region. There's no mention there of the national netball championships, which a number of schools within the region have done exceedingly well in getting to the final. So I just wanted to commend the Douglas Stewarts because they're not mentioned in this at all. And, you know, I appreciate it's a snapshot, but there's some really key things that maybe are not quite mentioned there. So I just wanted to big them up from my ward. So thank you.
Julie?
Thank you, Chair. In relation to page 67 for the RIDDER investigations and the reporting, you're absolutely correct. The reflection is that there is a downward trend. However, the numbers are tiny. We can sometimes be looking at 1, 2 or 3, which are actually to be investigated or reported. The update that I have from health and safety colleagues is that we're working very closely with the corporate team in realigning the health and safety agenda to better reflect the service delivery. So we're also looking at better and faster reporting from the service managers responsible for those particular areas to ensure that there isn't a delay in having the information provided to another officer who then has to input it and reflect that. So there's kind of 2 pieces of work that are aligning there. One is around the recording and the better ownership of that as a responsibility, and the second is around the timescales and just ensuring that the right person has the appropriate authority to make that report at the time. So, like I say, the numbers are very small, which can skew the percentages quite significantly.
Ivor?
Thank you, Chair. It's with regard to, I think it's Appendix 3, the National Improvement Framework. I think I asked this question last year or at a area committee. What are we doing to improve the differential between boys and girls? It appears that boys aren't performing as well consistently throughout from P1 through to S3, whereby they're always 4 or 5 percentage points behind the girls. And the other one that was sort of concerning was that when it came to S3, pupils achieving 4th level by any sort of measure. There seems to be a dip. Now, is that just the cohort that's going through, or is there a reason for that?
Jill?
Thank you. I'll take them in order. The boys and girls question is one that we have discussed at length, and girls outperform boys in all measures at all stages. They either equal or improve, and it is a national issue. There are targeted interventions across our schools, particularly boys in reading, boys in writing. Boys traditionally take more interest in some of the STEM work, and we've certainly had a focus of girls in STEM, but the interest levels and the attainment levels, it does look that girls continue to do well and outperform in final assessments. I don't have an easy answer for that. It's certainly multifactorial, and it's long-standing. In terms of your second point, level 4. Sorry, it must be an age thing. But again, there is a view that the standardised assessments at S3, the head teachers and class teachers feel slightly less confident in the achievement of a level in secondary school. And again, it's a national issue. It's still defined as experimental data. And what we're looking at now is giving schools a bit more confidence by triangulating their SQA attainment with their achievement of a level data. Because if the school attainment in S4, S5 and S6 is good, then these children are achieving the level, but perhaps teachers are not confident, suitably confident, in identifying that they're meeting that at S3. They tend to want to wait until the SQA examinations, and we're trying to give them confidence to report slightly earlier.
So how does that explain the drop if they were doing it the year before and they were better and then they're slightly down? That would suggest that the confidence is waning rather than gaining. You know, we're not getting more confident, we're getting less confident.
I think that is the case. There's a view of, we've talked before in this committee about in SQA examinations you can pass at 50%, but there's a view that at achievement of a level you have to completely complete the level before they'll get the tick in the box to say that they've completed it. So there is a view that the pupil has to do very, very well in the assessment or summative assessments before they will then be considered to have achieved that level. Whereas in an exam, they can pass at 50%.
Dick?
Thanks, Chair. Just on the young people theme, page 79, there's a indicator there. Number of young people attending youth work events, where the target 18,000, but we're actually achieving 44,742. It sounds great. It says it's individual children, but is it individual children or a number of children that double scored that have been to a number of events, which would sort of make the target maybe not as overachieved as it is there. So.
Steve?
Yep, thanks, Chair. It is mainly due to the attendance at youth beats and the individuals that attend that have significantly inflated the value of that target. So it is based on individuals.
Rose?
Thank you very much. I'm looking at page 119, and it's the third point down regarding speech, language and communication, and it's being flagged up as a concern and an increase in needs for children. I understand that there's a 2-year waiting list for speech and language therapy, and I just want to know, this is a crucial age for children. We know that they need to be assessed under 5, certainly under 7. These language difficulties can then lead to further problems, and that 2-year waiting list could make the difference between a child achieving or not achieving. And I just wondered what we were doing about that. Are we keeping our eye on that situation and how we're mitigating it?
I don't know if my colleague Hugh Smith would like to say something about that, but certainly my reading of that is that we're reducing the concern and that we're making interventions. But I'll ask Hugh to speak to that.
Absolutely share your concerns there. We are working with the Health Board and particularly the Speech and Language Service at the moment to look at a different model which allows them to focus on the priority, the children that absolutely need to get their individual therapeutic support while building capacity of our own existing staff within schools and particularly in the Supporting Learners Service to be able to implement some of the strategies. So we're conscious that, like all public sector, the Health Board are struggling at the moment, so we're looking at a different model that we can actually make sure we target the resource at the right children at the right time and also use their skills to build our capacity to be able to deliver more generally.
So would it be possible to have some of that detail, Hugh, about people?
Absolutely, we could bring something to the next committee. That would be helpful.
Thanks, Hugh. I've got George and Adam as first-time speakers, and then Ian. George?
Sorry about that, technology. I'm picking up on a few of the comments that's made really about attainment, and it's a general question, so forgive me if there's not a question in there, but being involved with parent councils for a long time now, and mixing with parents that have got particularly teenage children just now, one of the main issues, and it's highlighted at Annan Academy, where something like 40% of the children sit in exams in separate accommodation, and working with Hugh on the assisted learning support scheme. There's an increasing number of children have serious anxiety problems that are not really recognised with, if you like, a label. And one of the issues that a lot of parents have, and it comes up again and again in our discussions, is it's very difficult to gauge success and failure, and this is remarkable in the content and the detail. It identifies kids that get a certain number higher, etc., etc. One of the things that we're very conscious of is how many children don't achieve what they're capable of through no fault of their own. And one of the pressures is on teachers' time. And an empathetic teacher might pick something up of a child that's not got a label, but they're not quite achieving. It's back to your point where boys might not be as successful, but girls too. I know a very close young lady to myself who's a straight A student, couldn't set her exams this year because of pure anxiety, fear. She couldn't even think in the exams. Now, there's a danger that some of these kids get missed. And it's natural because we haven't got a bottomless pit of neither money nor resources or people. But it's something that parents are concerned of because it's happening. It's becoming, maybe it's anecdotal, but it's becoming an increasing problem that kids don't achieve, not because they're not able, but because the system maybe doesn't suit them. We don't have the teachers that can give them that attention, or we don't have the educational psychologists that are there when they're needed, sort of thing. But it's something that gets missed, and it's something that certainly the parent councils are very, very aware of. So it's just something I wanted to raise, and I know you've got budgets, and I know you'll be aware of this because you've been involved with teaching a lot more than I have, but it is an issue, and it's something we should really, really be aware of.
Gillian?
I think there's a lot in what you say, and we're all aware of individual cases, and we're aware of individual pupils or in particular subjects. This report very much gives an overview of the senior phase, around 5,000 children, so we know that attainment is improving on the whole. We've also got to be careful not to over-medicalise anxiety. I think quite often there's a view that sitting exams is stressful, life is stressful, working is stressful, but there are levels of positive stress and there are levels at which it does become needing additional support. So our schools are they're working with partners for early intervention to try and demedicalise some of the stress that people are experiencing, and making sure that those who do require clinical intervention are suitably referred and there is resources to do that, be it through CAMS or educational psychology. You also talk about the system not suiting some children, and that's where I think our schools are really well placed. Through the new senior phase strategy that will come to members in September, you've been heavily involved yourself, I know, in the foundation apprenticeships and looking at how other children can achieve qualifications, which are not the traditional 5-higher model. So making sure that our children get as much support as possible, as early as possible, and ensuring that the curriculum better meets their needs, I think are the two ways to target some of the concerns that you raise.
If I could just add to that, Gillian. Thanks, Chair. I think it's also true, notwithstanding the challenge, and you're right, that there will be young people who don't do as well as they could have done. There's no doubt about that. But in many ways, you know, we really welcome the move to school empowerment. The people that deliver improved attainment, improved achievement for young people are in our schools. They're not sitting here. What we do as a committee and what we do as a service is try to set the right climate so that schools can take kids forward. But as a further reassurance, I was a secondary head 12 years ago, and the level now of individual tracking of pupils has increased dramatically because of technology and how teachers are working. So that I do genuinely think there will be fewer pupils for whom it's missed that they're not making good progress, if that's any reassurance.
It's still missing a lot of children, and I know that's a resource issue and all the rest of it. We are still missing a lot of vulnerable kids that might never even be noticed, sort of thing. And I agree that I've heard this before, Gillian, that exams are stressful, so is life. But that shouldn't disallow young people that find it more difficult from reaching what they're capable of. You know, we can't just dismiss people because life's difficult and all the rest of it. Because a lot of the people that do have these issues are the more thoughtful, caring kids that are maybe getting dismissed. I know it's a huge challenge, and I know that Annan Academy in particular are working really hard on this. I totally acknowledge that. But there's more that needs to be done, and it may come down to money or just being innovative, but we need to work hard at it, in my view.
Okay, Adam?
Thanks. Just back to the point that I was making, I thought that was really important what you said, Gillian, about teachers don't quite have the confidence in the assessment, you know, because surely, you know, if kids doing assessments, you know, if teachers don't have the confidence in what that's telling them, then actually it's a bit of a waste of the people's time and the teachers' time in carrying out that assessment, because they're not going to use that information to better the learning. So is it a problem because, you know, at the end of the day, on an exam script, it's not a literacy level, it's not a numeracy level, it is an SQA exam level. And because obviously they now start at the beginning of S4 rather than the beginning of S3, that 2 years that teachers would continually assessed, not just via formal tests, but also via homework and other means. Is it a problem that actually teachers aren't really getting the amount of time that they used to have to measure and assess how that information is applied to problem solving? You know, because the hardest bit of a maths test is not Pythagoras' theorem, it's how you apply Pythagoras' theorem. So, you know, is there that problem that there maybe isn't as much time as there used to be to actually assess how you apply that knowledge? Because obviously that can be used much better by teachers and everyone involved to make sure that they improve learning and teaching. So, you know, is that an issue that we need to look at a wee bit further?
I think the confidence for me in this specific level, in this specific case, is working through our quality assurance and moderation support officers, through our QAMSOs as they're referred to, so that schools, whether you're in a home economics class or whether you're in an English class, whether you're in Annan or Stranraer, they get a general sense that what achievement is in one school is the same as in another school and then across the region. So our school, inter-school quality assurance and moderation, and then across the regional collaborative, so that we're getting a confident workforce that they can pin their colours to the mast in terms of achievement. So I don't want to suggest that there are more systemic problems. I think this is the introduction of something that's still relatively new, and that teachers are working together to be confident in how they use that result, particularly in secondary schools.
So I've got Ian, Timothy and David. Ian? Timothy?
Thank you, Chair. I'm looking at page 77, which is the exception report on the number of days lost to work through non-teacher employees. I've noticed over the years that there is a clear problem, it seems to me here, and there seems to be a staff welfare issue at stake, really involved. It's pretty obvious that people working in non-teaching jobs are not going to have a natural disposition to be sicker than teachers. or be more prone to catch things than teachers. It seems to me that the difference is likely to be the job and the way in which people are managed. One of the most important ways in which, having worked in schools for many years, I've noticed a difference is how much more discretion teachers have over the way they work, over the job, how they organise things, than the bulk of the non-teaching staff in school. And I wondered if any investigation has been done about this question of a higher sickness absence amongst non-teaching staff, into the relationship between it and the job and the jobs they're being asked to do and the ways in which they're being managed.
Thank you. I think the non-teaching, although accepting what you say, Mr. Birrell, this is also inclusive of our social work support staff. This is a CYPLL absence report. So I think it'll be much clearer when we bring the next report in terms of education and learning. We'll get a greater comparison for the staff who are in our schools. So we can actually look at the work in our schools, and then we can drill down, as you ask, in terms of investigating the nature of relationships in schools and the flexibility offered to teaching staff and those in non-teaching roles. So in the main, I'm looking to Gillian here, I know that the social work staff absence is...
Yeah, I think just to add to what Gillian's saying, obviously this is reflective of the entire CYPLL staff cohort. It does reflect other additional roles, such as our adult sports workers. But just to pick up on your point around people's ability to organise their own day, I would just reiterate the Council's position on agile working, flexible working. There are a number of schemes out there to support workers and staff in every role that's carried out across the Council to take more ownership and accountability for their own role, their own time and their working life balance. I think this report, and as you correctly state, it has been significantly underperforming for a number of years, and that is because we recognise that there is a turnover of staff, there are stress in the workplace, there are one-off medical occurrences where somebody ends up being out of work for a planned operation, which will skew our figures. So there are a number of different things that come together to give you this final performance report. And I think, just to reiterate what Gillian said, as the services disaggregate, you will probably see a much more detailed reflection of the whys and wherefores around that. I do appreciate that this is quite a blanket approach to teaching non-teaching staff as a performance indicator, but I take your point.
David? Thanks, Chair. You're talking about you're pressurising children. The last talk we had there, you're talking about children achieving, what they can maximise in their achievement, and that's fair enough. But are we not putting excessive pressure on youngsters nowadays? You get youngsters that self-harming and doing terrible things to themselves. Are we not to blame for some of that? Do we need to look at things differently? It's all right talking about achieving when you're 14, 15, 16-year-old, but some youngsters will achieve after that. They'll achieve at school, but once they've left school, start working, get involved in hands-on work and that sort of thing, and they'll achieve their maximum doing that rather than through the school, the curriculum and that sort of thing. I can worry sometimes that we're putting pressure onto kids that we shouldn't be doing. Fair enough, I accept you want them to achieve their maximum, but you've got to watch what you're doing. Youngsters can't accept that sort of pressure.
Chair, I think I absolutely take that point. I think there's quite a lot of societal pressure that it's increased significantly, and particularly with social media, etc. There's evidence recently, which is quite interesting, which shows that a lot of young people are actually working harder for exams than they had been before. I think the critical part of this, and it probably goes along with what you're suggesting, Councillor McKee, is that we have got different career pathways, that we've got different curricular pathways, so that what we're not doing, what we mustn't do, is pressure young people into only trying to get higher maths and English, for example, and that we've got appropriate courses for young people to be able to achieve and demonstrate that they're good at the things that they're good at. And I think I think as an authority, we're really doing pretty well that way, and we'll continue to work on that.
Just a quickie on speech. I was walking up the street one day and there was a mother and a wee kid, I'm not kidding, the wee Wayne must be 2.5, 3-year-old. And he heard the mother talking and he heard the Wayne talking, and God, she thought it was her double. Absolute copy of her mother. And I think that's a lot of the problem with youngsters and their speech. There's too many got their phones in their hands and things like that, and no talking to the Waynes.
Yeah, just on the back of that, just reading through the report, I was concerned. I can't remember which particular aspect, but I think it was something to do with hospitality. Youngsters had been doing well with that until they actually brought in a written aspect of that, and then the numbers actually, I don't know whether it was taking part or qualifying, actually fell by about 50%. I do worry about that. Once again, you're throwing it back into the vocational versus academic issue. Some youngsters are quite happy to do the vocational things and do them really well, but once you bring back the academic testing into it, then you begin to lose them.
If I may, Chair, it's the who do we mean by we question. We did not bring in a written assessment. That's a national piece of work. We do not put pressure on children to sit national fives in all cases. It's parents and employers that actually, and children themselves. Children don't necessarily want to sit national fours because they are not seen as being valuable out there. Schools will be very careful of children's health and well-being. It's one of their absolute core purposes. But society at large, there are a lot of pressures on young people. There are pressures to earn, there are pressures on house ownership, there are pressures on contractual arrangements with employers. We're a very low wage economy, and we know that half of our children want to leave Dumfries and Galloway. That is not wholly in the control of our schools, and therefore I think it's very important we look at the we in the roundest sense.
Okay, Ian, then we'll move to the recommendation.
Just a quick reassurance, Chairman. Question, it's on page 71. Relates probably a bit to the last agenda item. It's failure, so it's the last one in that table, CYPLL 05, failure to reduce the gap in attainment for the most vulnerable people. It's got reassurance in regards to the mitigation that's there, that is effective in your professional view, is what I'm asking in real terms.
In general terms, in closing the poverty-related attainment gap, we are reducing the gap, and however, the easiest way to decrease the gap is to decrease the attainment of those at the top. So I am not complacent that we have a lot of work to do, but again, it is not a straightforward issue, and there will always be children with needs and children who need more support, as we've heard from a lot of the discussion this morning. And poverty does correlate with poorer performance. So we're working really hard through PEF and targeted initiatives and using a lot of research and using a lot of partners' work in terms of health and well-being, because we know that's absolutely core for children. But there's a lot of work to do, and it is a priority for us.
Just a quick comment, if that's okay, because when you look at the original risk, the current risk and the target risk, there's no movement here at all. You don't see the trend, but I would imagine that's made an assumption actually that it's stable. So we're a long way off our target goal, so to speak.
I've got two late indications. George, you want in, and then Willie, and then we'll move to the recommendations, definitely.
Just a quick one, just to back up the wise words from our more venerable councillor over there. There is different ways to quantify success and attainment, and one of the things that I'm working in my own professional life is to develop modern apprenticeships and graduate apprenticeships. It's quite difficult to get across to parents, in particularly, that the value of a graduate apprenticeship is just the same, if not more respected in industry than a more traditional route. It's not to say there's nothing wrong with the traditional route, but in my own work trying to speak to young people and their parents, for example, that there's a great career in being a dairy farm manager at £70,000 a year. It's quite difficult until you start mentioning the technical innovation that's moved on in agriculture, and it could be construction. But one of the hard things at school is we've still got this hangover that everybody, and their parents in particular, aspire to get their kids to university. There's different ways to get to university. There's one young lady that did a modern apprenticeship on a dairy farm who's now got a degree. And she just went up different pathways. But I think the careers advice is really critical, and also the advice to young people when they're making subject choices, second year, third year, that they don't close the doors. And one of the irritations for me is parents moaning about the lack of subject choice and things like that, because in the senior phase they can pick up a lot of different subjects, but there is still, and I say this very respectfully because I know it's a resources issue, there's still a lack of really, really good career and pathways advice at school. I know that from first-hand experience, and that's industry's job as well to get that information into schools, but that partnership between education, schools, colleges, further education probably needs to be enhanced, and I know you're doing work on that, but there's still work to be done.
And finally, Willie.
Yeah, Chairman, just a quick point, and I'm looking at page 68 and 69, and there's been discussions George referred to earlier, and it's item 3, failure to fulfil ASL duties and residential placement arrangement and operational changes and improvement associated with GIRFEC, and that's getting it right for every child. And we've heard, difficulties and I think we are on the increase in terms of autism, and that's across the board, across the country. We have kids, 1 in 4 kids suffering from mental health issues, and Gillian says she's working hard at it. In terms of each of the children and getting it right for every child, that they reach their maximum potential, what confidence or assurance can you give us that we are dealing with this against the backdrop of continual reduction in funding, education, teachers, ASL, so forth, and I know you refer to the reconfiguration. What confidence can you give us that we are reaching kids to their maximum potential with all the difficulties that's associated with this? Because that's not what I'm hearing in the schools throughout, where we've got, I know one in Stranraer not attending school, and I believe there's others, because they've lost confidence.
Chair, I'm just wondering if there's a really good opportunity to expand on that discussion in the item later on in the agenda, which is around how we're developing ESL.
Okay. Right, thank you, members. Just before we do move to the recommendation, reading through the Appendix 3, the National Improvement Framework Evidence Report, I think there's an awful lot of very interesting data which just shows what's actually going on within the region, which most members of the public, and I think possibly some members of the committee, aren't aware of what's going on in terms of initiatives. So I think it does make very interesting reading, and it is very detailed, and I think it's certainly worth going in and seeing what is actually happening. So can we move to the recommendations and find them? Okay, I think 2.1, we've reviewed the overall summary for the end of year performance. Happy with that? And we've also 2.2, scrutinised the exception reporting. And 2.3, as I was saying, Appendix 3, we noted the National Improvement Framework Evidence Report. And 2.4, we've noted the Draft Annual Children's Services Plan at Appendix 4. Okay, thank you. So we move on to item 6 on page 249. Early Learning and Childcare Plan for the expansion towards 1,140 hours by 2020-21. This is a standing item on the CYPLLL agenda, and this is the July update. This paper shares the uptake of hours within the 1,140 hours settings from last year to the current, and shows the parents and carers so far taking increased hours year on year. The paper also details the current position with Phase 4 of Dumfries Early Learning and Childcare Profession, and highlights that Dumfries Learning Town Phase 2 may not align with the Council's statutory duty to provide 1,140 hours of ELC to all eligible children by August next year. The paper details options for members' consideration and agreement. We have Lauren Foss to speak to this. Lauren, is there anything you want to add to the paper?
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points, if I may. I think what's interesting on the table at 3.1 is obviously the percentages change from previous years to this around the total uptake. However, one of the partner providers, St Columbus, playgroup in Annan, having had discussions with them around why the uptake is so low at the 2%, they took a decision to work with the parents around, actually, we are not able to offer you the full 1140 if you all want to stay within this setting, but if you took slightly reduced hours, we would be able to accommodate you all. So they collectively took the decision to reduce their hours slightly so they could all still remain within the same facility, which is why the 2% is so low at that point. So if you strip that out of the table, the actual average percentage of children taking the full 1140 hours would be 56%, which is up from last year. The only other piece of information that I think I would add is around the options for Noble Hill and increasing capacity. I think on reflection, one thing that the options don't reflect is around the quality of the experience that the youngsters would have within the options there. The recommendation that officers are supportive of increases the quality of the environment within the existing built facility and would probably be a much more in line with a nursery experience that we would expect to see in other locations and other settings. If, for example, the temporary building was to be sort of airlifted in and dropped in there, that experience wouldn't really align greatly with what the expectation would be for a free-flow nursery environment. So there's things that we can probably expand on through discussions as we go through the paper. Thanks, Chair.
Members? Ian?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Lauren, for that explanation. I suppose my questions are more kind of wider in regards to the delivery of the 1140 in that particular area. So Dumfries, we've had quite a bit of discussion around about this. So from the report, it says there's a need of 1086, 818, I think is the current, what's there. So there's a 268 difference. This is to start to address that. It goes towards about 100 of them. So we're looking to spend, I think it's 850k potentially, as far as the recommendations on the two schools. So obviously you look at how much you spend, what you get from that and so on and so forth. So I just wondered, so there's 11 providers, I think it is from the PVI, and is it, or 14 and 11 from, it's 14 from PVI and 11 from the school estate themselves. Doesn't it tell you what the numbers are in regards to that? So I don't actually know what the numbers are. Yeah, I've not got them in front of us anyways, and I forgot, I think I've been told them before, but anyways, that might be valuable, it might not. But I just wonder, what level of engagement have we had with the PVI sector in regards to this? I know you have been engaging with them, obviously, Lauren, and there's a perception there, I think, that they could probably address quite a chunk of this capacity. So I just wondered if you could expand in that. So the question really is, why are we spending £850,000 if we can address a big lump of this capacity, or is it being future-proofed? Just like to get the clear understanding of what the kind of the working out is of this these recommendations.
Aaron?
Yeah, so we have engaged with all the PVI sector a while ago now around what capacity they have available within their own settings, and where there were capacity gaps. Obviously, that's where the ability to look at a capital grant to support expansion was discussed and put out there. However, the locations that we're looking to expand in, particularly for Laurie now, it follows the Scottish Government blueprint around use what you have and then purchase what you need, and then at that point then you would extend physical capacity. So if we stuck with the two recommendations, they are effectively using what we have already. So it stays in line with the blueprint. I think one of the bits of information that's really important around capacity is calculated inside the PVI sector is the fact that each space is treated as being able to accommodate 1.5 children, and that's consistent right across Dumfries and Galloway. So you remember the discussions that we've had with partners around how that was arrived at. To protect them as a business, there was a little bit of flexibility in there to allow paid for 2-year-old children to remain within their settings. And then after that, it was, right, what physically are you registered for with the Care Inspectorate? What expansion could you do by re-registering extra spaces that are existing within your facilities? And then taking those numbers, feeding that back into the mix, that's what's driven the overall capacity gap across Dumfries. I think Dumfries itself was broken down into various different sections because it's almost too big to look at in totality. Dumfries as a town, they're the numbers that says, you know, we've got 1,086 children just now, and we don't have enough spaces. If it went to the number of capacity spaces that we have just now to meet that, but by the time you take in the 1.5 for the partner providers in there, it still leaves a shortfall. So the only way to get to where we needed it to be was to have some level of expansion out there. Now, Dumfries Learning Town 2 did account for that capacity expansion in the original planning. So obviously with that now potentially not aligning with the statutory requirement to deliver 1140, we need to come up with an alternative solution to meet that capacity gap. And it is across 2 locations. Laurie now, we are working with the partners in that area. So we've got Calder Bank, which is just round the corner from the school. They are physically expanding their space by an additional 16 spaces. So that's had an impact on the requirement there. We've spoken to the partners in the Noble Hill area. I suppose the closest one is Happy Faces, where there's absolutely the perception that will have an impact on their business moving forward. What needs to be remembered is that we have a school next to Happy Faces, Georgetown Primary School. It has a capacity for 50 children, so it has 50 in the morning, 50 in the afternoon. It will not see any expansion, so effectively there are 50 children that will have nowhere to go come 1140, so they will be displaced in that area. Some of that will be soaked up through including a nursery facility at Calside Primary School, but it doesn't offset the 50 children in there. If we look then towards Noble Hill itself, it has capacity currently for 40 children. It's projected to need capacity for around 60 moving into the future. So again, even just moving to the 56, it leaves displacement in that area. So I would say for the partners in those areas, they'll actually see the number of children coming through the doors increase. Is it value for money? That's a discussion that could go on for a while, given the numbers that are in there. But what it does do is it allows us to make sure we meet our statutory duty to deliver to the full uptake of the hours.
No, thanks. That's a very full answer. It's exactly what I thought it was. But just in regards to the question was specifically around about, and I suppose it's what the wider perception is out there, Lauren, in regards to if we spend this money in this way, they say £850,000, we increase our capacity from a school point of view. But is that capacity, does it already exist within the PVI sector? And that needs to be borne out. And I think what you're saying is with regards to the calculation being 1.5 rather than potentially more. I just wonder if we could get that answered in public so we're absolutely clear that that's the capacity. Is it or is it not there? And do we have any indication to what the figures are?
Yeah, I mean, that's all been factored in as the calculations. I'm happy to share that information as well. So absolutely, we are relying on our partners to deliver the maximum amount of capacity that they have.
Katie?
Thank you, and thank you, Aaron, for the information. It's a huge task. I think at our last committee we had 3 of the blueprints in our papers, which were significant. So it is a large task that you're faced with. I'm just actually, my question's based on my own experience within my ward, where we've been looking at this very issue. And the information that we've got before us doesn't actually give us the capacity for the primary school. And you've talked about the stakeholder engagement with the other nurseries and the expansion, but how are we engaging with the actual primary school and the PTCs if there is going to be an effect on the capacity of the primary? Because if we're using the existing capacity, in the next item, it actually gives us the capacity of Noble Hill. It's sitting at 101%, and Laurie now at 77%. But what will those capacities then go to if we've removed some of the capacity of the primary to put it into the nursery provision? Because that detail is missing from the report here, as far as I can see.
What the overall process following the blueprint, use what we have, looked at the capacities as agreed through this committee in September every year. So they're based on the utilisation within each school. If there happened to be a nursery at that school that needed to see expansion, we then looked at how many classrooms were in that building that were required for learning and teaching purposes. If they were over the number of general purpose classrooms, it was only ever general purpose classrooms that we'd have been utilising at that point in time. So there was a guidance document came out from the Scottish Government around how primary school capacities were calculated in November 2014. I think we adopted it later on in 2015. So any school with between 1 and 7 classrooms would require 1 general purpose room, and then 8 to 14 it required 2 general purpose classrooms. So it was only if it was over and above that within the existing schools we looked to utilise that space as nursery accommodation potentially. We have, wherever we've looked at expanding nursery provision, we've had direct engagement with the teaching staff within the facility to talk about what that looks like and how that could shape up. There's only a handful of locations where this has happened across the authority, and I think we've tried to make sure that we put in an appropriate value for money solution in these areas. I think there's always going to be differences in pupil uptake within schools, whether it's territorial or extraterritorial. So I would suspect that the school in question has been one of those locations where the numbers have been fluctuating on whether they'd require the additional classroom or not. Where that's the case and that classroom is required in the future for territorial pupils, then we would look to address that.
Can I just ask though, in terms, I'm not going to go into other issues. I'm looking at the one that we have before us today, and there's no information as to what, because it states 3.2.7, the last line says to utilise space within the existing building. What effect would that have on the capacity of the primary school? I guess is my question, because that data is not before us today.
I can get those numbers to you specifically, but for Laurie now, there are 16 classrooms in that school. The pupil numbers have suggested that they only need 11 classrooms, and that's how they're staffed for next academic year. I don't know the school roll off the top of my head right now, but so in reality there are 5 rooms in that school that are not used for teaching spaces, and that's over and above the general purpose area. So I can give you the exact numbers on that. For Noble Hill, their roll has dropped to 271, which means they require 10 teaching spaces. They used to use 11. The rolls come down enough to release that 11th classroom. However, they are currently only using 1 general purpose room, and they should have 2. So that's why that 11th classroom isn't being used for nursery accommodation. It's going to remain as a general purpose room. But I can get you the exact numbers on classes and pupils.
Yeah, Chair, I heard Lan saying that I had discussion with Lan and John Finn just before we came in, but the increase and the percentage uptake by taking a reduction in the 1140 hour delivery in Annan would bring us up, by increasing that 2%, would bring us up to 56%. And it's reference to that, and recognising that there is no catchment area for nurseries. Nevertheless, I think we recognise that children want to follow their siblings, their older brothers and sisters, and we try to accommodate that. But it's not so much what's in the report as to what's not there, and that's the Stranraer area. And already I'm hearing from a number of primary schools in the Stranraer area that they're going to face difficulty in terms of them being able to deliver on the 1140, where they're currently under pressure because they don't have the spaces. And some of the schools, like Annan, have reduced their 1140 hours on delivery so that the kids, and it meets the needs of the parents, so that they get into the school of their choice, and the school indeed where their older brothers and sisters received the nursery education. So I think this one, and Lauren and the 4 members have had discussions with the schools on this in terms of how we designed, if you like, the nursery provision around the various schools. But I think we're going to face difficulty. I know Lauren's going to come back and say, no, we don't need a problem, but I think that we are going to have a problem with the schools and the provision of the 1140 in a number of the different schools, in the 5 schools in Stranraer, some of which are not going to be able to fulfil our legal requirement to deliver this 1140. And I think we need to return to that in Stranraer by the 4 members.
Don't have a problem. No.
You don't have a problem in returning to the issue, because I think we are going to have a problem in Stranraer in terms of what's coming back from the schools, in that they're under pressure to deliver the 1140, and some have already reduced that just to accommodate the wishes of the parents?
This is the difficult question about it all, because in Stranraer, holistically, there isn't a problem, because holistically the spaces are there, but it's about where they are. And I think moving through the early access, because it's early access that we're providing just now, the statutory duty is there from August 20 onwards. We have a mix of families that have an experience of 600 hours, where you can have a nursery age child in the nursery just now in a morning session, and then different nursery age children in an afternoon session. So you're providing for twice the number of children that space can provide for now for 1140. Now, that means that those children are displaced somewhere else. It might mean they're displaced to another local authority setting. So it might be from one primary school to another, or it might be to a partner provider in the area as well. That's the worst case scenario. That's not a great place to be in, and I completely accept that. So if you're a parent with a child that's had year one nursery experience in school A, and then when they enrol for year two, I'm sorry, you're displaced. You have to take them somewhere else. That's not a great place to be in. However, that experience is the transition year. This will be a one-off. As we move forward, there will be no children that will have been able to have experienced nursery provision in a school and then be displaced in future years, because the capacity is changing, and that's the real difficulty just now. I think also it's not fair or appropriate, I think, for nurseries to be able to deliver capacity for the number of children that would like to go there, because that would effectively mean there would be no PVI sector at all, because they don't align with a school. So we need to remember that there is a mix of sort of 60-40% out there. So if we were looking at being able to provide catchment areas and provide nurseries for the number of nursery age children coming up through those establishments, it would remodel the whole of the authority, and it would absolutely decimate the private and voluntary sector, because they wouldn't exist anymore. So yes, right now it is very difficult, because we have families that are being displaced. The same experience happened in Annan at Newington. It saw no expansion. There were a number of families that expressed extreme concerns that they had had a child in the nursery for year one and weren't able to return in year two. That has settled down. It has found a place where actually the families with where their children are going now are settled, but it's not their first choice. It was not their first choice. It happened to be maybe their second or their third. And I think Stranraer has to almost go through that process, unfortunately. Ultimately, when you look at the number of hours that we have to deliver across the settings that we have in Stranraer, there is a space of safety for everybody. Unfortunately, it's maybe not where they want it to be, and unfortunately, it may not have been what they've been experiencing for their year one nursery just now.
And I hear what I hear what Lauren's saying, but I think I'll put in a precursor that we may have to return to this. There's one thing making that explanation, but it's looking at the locality where you could have someone either in Australure or in Shuken Parks, and they've got to travel the whole length of Stranraer to get to that nursery where the provision is. And I'm only making that point. So I think we may need to return, whether the parents in Stranraer have to go through the pain of this is another question. So I just want to put in that precursor that I think we're going to return to this, and it's not in the report.
Ian, and then we'll go to the recommendation.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be brief. I think it's relevant to bring it up now because we're talking about capital spend, and there's particular pressures, and there's no mention of it here, obviously, but I think maybe in future reports we maybe have to see it at some point. So on a wider communications and conversation we're having, so Gretna Primary School and Wallace Hall, I think there's extreme pressures on them in regards to the population growth in those particular areas. So I think we maybe need to see that at some point, how we potentially address that problem. So whether it's them two places or somewhere else, Some of it's not just obvious, but my understanding is that because of the number of residential units that are being built in the Gretna area, it's not just the primary school, it's the early learning as well. There's got to be a real pressure on that potentially as time goes on. Just so we're absolutely future-proofing it, kind of feeds into what Willie was just saying there as well. But how do we address the whole? It has got to be, I think wraparound care is absolutely essential in the PVI sector to address that pretty much for us. So I think we have to have that mix, parental choices, everything.
It's a really good point. There's lots of developments identified in the local development plan too, across the whole authority. I think it probably doesn't sit for the early learning and childcare specifically. I think that's a holistic solution that needs to be brought in for secondary, primary and nursery provision, and then it's all factored within that. What the government are quite clear on is that the funding that exists is the like-for-like solution just now. So anything over and above that through developers extending housing sites would have to come through contributions.
I could remind you, that's probably my exact point, because as it stands, it's registered social landlords that are developing in these areas. The expansion is massive, and there's no developers' contributions. And I didn't get into that level of detail, but that's got to be a particular pressure on the council, unless, of course, it changes its policy on developers' contributions.
Yeah, and that was raised at Planning Applications Committee. It's the piecemeal development, and it's the cumulative effect on the capacity. That's something which we really need to keep an eye on in terms of capacity. Okay, so I think we've had a good debate about that. Can we move to the recommendations? Can we note 2.1, agree 2.2, and agree 2.3 in light of the explanation that Lauren gave? Yep. Okay, thanks. So if we move to item 7 on page 255, Education Savings 2019-20 Staffing Update. As this committee considered the budget, it was agreed that a further report specifically the Education Services staffing budget would be presented to this committee in July, once the staffing allocation had been completed and the probationary allocation finalised from the Scottish Government. We are very pleased that all probationary teachers, either choosing or being allocated a D&G, passed their training year, which is great credit to them, their supporters in school, and the programme of support offered by the authority. We now have 89 probationers starting with us in August, in 14 secondary and 47 primary schools. The report confirms that it anticipates that for August there will be 2 schools with a school roll between 19 and 25 pupils. John Thin, Susan Martin and Gillian Bridson are here to answer any questions on the report. Gillian and John, is there anything you want to add?
No, not specifically, Chair. I think the report does focus on the 2 areas of concern, and it links also to the previous item, actually, because the first concern was the one-class schools, and the second area that you wish to get further information on was subject choice. So that's included in the appendix, but it only details the National 3 through to advanced hires, because the subject choice argument has been very much related to hires and advanced hires. It does not reflect the broader range of qualifications available in our schools. It doesn't include foundation apprenticeships and HNCs, for example. So I think the 2 items link quite interestingly.
I agree. I think these 2 items link very interestingly. One thing that was mentioned in the previous report was that schools under the guidelines should have 2 general purpose classrooms. I think as a council we have discussed quite a lot about schools that have a low utilisation, although a number of my schools in my ward are at the other end of the scale, and on many occasions have actually lost their general purpose classrooms for various reasons, and sometimes that's been a temporary measure, which is more understandable. In some cases it's actually we don't have a clue, and it might be gone forever, it might return at some point. But given that schools should have 2 general purpose classrooms on the guidelines, what we're going to do to fix that issue, in schools where sometimes, understandably, on a temporary basis, a general purpose classroom is lost for various reasons. But I think in my experience, schools have had a knock-on effect with their ability to deal with more complex behaviours as a result of losing a general purpose classroom, and also they've had a detrimental impact on being able to change teaching methods and get out the classroom, particularly during the winter months. So I think, I know it's not the content of the report today, but that link between these 2 reports is there, and the loss of general purpose classrooms in some schools is having an effect, I think we need to look at actually how do we remedy that.
Okay, certainly, I think it's a start that we're bringing the capacities and roles to you, and we're publishing that now on our website. We'll update that every year, and that we are reviewing our school estate management information to make sure that the enrolment procedures are robust in conjunction with the capacity of the school. Operationally, John, is there anything?
I mean, I think what we would want in all of our schools is equity. We'd like to have everybody having the same ample opportunity of experience for the young people, but we have got an estate which has got quite a varied state of repair, as we know, through the asset class, but also in terms of age, size, suitability, etc., etc. And I think what the guidance that we received in 2014 from the Scottish Government round about what every school should have is certainly what we're still working towards. I don't think we're there yet. We do realise within the paper today that you'll see that some of our schools are actually maxed out, if you like, in terms of the capacity, and we're actually using some of the space that we'd prefer not to be using. And indeed, some of our schools, because we've had pressures put on them through catchment enrolments, we've actually had to increase the team teach situations, etc., to try and alleviate some of the pressure points. So it's a movable feast, but what we do know is that as we move forward, and I know that, as Gillian said, we're publishing the information much more widely now, and we are going to carry out a further capacities paper. We'll bring a further capacities paper to committee in September, which will give an update with regards to some of the information that was shared in the previous paper regarding the impact of early learning and childcare and using what we've got. So by doing all of that, I think we'll get to a position where we'll have much more clarity, much more understanding, and hopefully from there have a better view forward with the view that we do know that our birth rate is lower in our primary schools, and we know that over the next 3 to 4 years that we're predicting something in the region of 1,000 children less being in our schools, which will obviously have an impact as we move forward in terms of where the hotspots are. But picking up on the point I think that Councillor Carruthers made earlier on regarding some of our hotspots continue to have growth. We do know that some of the areas in the northwest, the corridor, the sort of A74 corridor, are presenting some challenges for us, and other places are becoming more depopulated. There's less population in some of those areas, so therefore the demographics around about some of those areas is changing as well. So I think it's all of that getting into the mix to have a really good look at it, having a really good plan as we move forward, so that we are taking account of all the information that we hold to try and make sure we're planning as best we can to provide that equitable experience for our young people.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, welcome this report. Excellent report. It's really good to see it after the full council meeting on 7th of May. So I'll get cut straight to the point for myself. So Appendix 2, so it addresses the problem what was really raised there in real terms in regards to the single teacher primary schools at the above 19 threshold. So what's been brought as a concern to myself, and sorry for not getting back to you, John, just it was phone signals and such like, but I think it's straightforward for you to answer. So there's two methodologies seem to be getting applied to the two schools. One's getting a high level of resource from the other. That's what it looks like. Maybe it's because there's a probationer being used. So concerns I'm getting raised from some parents is, why is that school getting 2 full-time teachers and we're getting probation, and it's got to have an effect on our children's learning and so on and so forth. So that's really the crux of the question for me. Certainly support the recommendations, what's being proposed here, and it addresses the problem what was put to full council at that time. Welcome that, but it seems to be a different level of proportionality when it comes to funding in regards to a different methodology. If you could explain that out and get really need reassurance in regards to the quality of teaching that will be provided.
Thank you, Councillor. So you'll appreciate that the timing of where we got to with full council through to where we are just now was quite a complicated, complex process, because we were still going through the enrolment process. We were still having children enrolling and disenrolling from schools, moving from one school to another, etc., etc. So it is a movable feast, and one of the things that we have to keep an eye on pretty much on a daily basis is how do the enrolments affect the numbers. From the full council decision at the budget setting process in February, what we did notice that with a number of our schools there was a sort of surge in interest. We probably know the schools we're talking about in terms of catchment children went back to their schools, although we were predicting that they would probably lose a teacher. The likelihood was that through the council decision and the local community involvement that actually that changed where the footfall was, and potentially they were coming back to their local school. So that did change things as we moved forward. And as we moved into the allocation of the probationers, this is a long process. It literally starts sort of the first day after the Christmas holidays. We start to work on the staffing for the subsequent year. And one of those aspects is to try and bid for our probationer allocation to make sure that we're, as the director said earlier on, to try and get that balance, that demographic balance between having experienced staff in schools but also bringing the new, fresh talent into the schools, ensuring that they're getting the best programme possible to try and make sure that they stay with us in Dumfries and Galloway. And I can explain a little bit more about that in a minute or two if you give me the time. But also, when the probationers come in, we were obviously looking at where can we allocate those probationers to make sure it's as cost effective to the council as it possibly can be. They are our cheapest resource in terms of their teaching complement. They're paid at a lower scale point than other teachers. Teachers go through an incremental scale point. And it's also about matching up what the school's needs were. And with the two schools that are actually in the paper under Appendix 2, it was very much in consultation with the head teachers about what they felt were the best aspects for them in terms of what they're to meet the pupils' needs within their schools, and indeed their partnership, because both of those schools are actually partnership schools. Cumbertrees is with Carrotherstown and Springfield's with Kirkpatrick Fleming, and the head teachers were confident that that was the best solution, on the assumption that we had committee decision today, an agreement today that we could go ahead with this in order that they could then staff their schools to ensure that they had two full-time teachers in the two classes, based on the decision that would be made today. And by that I mean that although there's a 0.8 allocation, a probationer teacher can only teach up to 0.8. That's part of their contractual agreement, their training agreement, if you like, because one of their days is out to engage in continuing professional learning. So they're engaged with their supporter, they're engaged with a local authority through professional learning, they're engaged with their cluster, they're engaged with observations in other schools to ensure that their professional learning continues to grow, and therefore we allocate a further 0.2 into that school to ensure that they get the full complement of teaching staff. So the two classes within each of the schools, excuse me, will be taught by two full-time equivalent teachers, but they might not all be the same teacher in both of the classes. With a probationer, there would be another teacher covering that other day. So does that provide clarity around about that part of the question?
Yeah, absolutely does, Chair. Thank you.
Dick?
Thanks, Chair. Heartily welcome this common sense approach to Cumbertrees and Springfield schools. It's good that they'll maintain their teacher numbers. It says in 3.7 on page 257 that it's recognised that teaching a multi-composite class of children from P1 to P7 requires specific learning and teaching approaches. I think that's a euphemism for it's a very difficult thing to teach over 20 youngsters aged 5 to 12 with different needs and meet their needs at each age and stage of their development. So I welcome this common sense approach.
Katie?
Thank you, Chair. I'm looking for fine detail again, which I do like, as those of you who know me now. On page 263, we've got the mitigation costs, etc., and it's got the expected school roll for August 2019. Now, you said previously there, John, that we're expecting 1,000 children less, and you've got the data for the next 3 to 4 years on birth rates. What is the projected roll for these schools for August 20? Because if we've got the data, obviously that's not guaranteed, but it gives us a rough indication of where these two schools are going for the future. So do you have that information that you can possibly share?
We have the data. I don't have it to hand, unfortunately, but I'm, again, happy to share that out after committee, if that would be helpful. My colleague Leslie's over there.
I guess my question is, because on the data we've got before us, Cumbertrees has gone from 39 pupils down to 24. That's 15 pupils difference, which in a small school is hugely significant. Is that likely, apologies, I don't know Cumbertrees, it's not within my ward, is that likely to go up, or are there outside reasons as to why those 15 children are no longer at the school?
So I think what you've highlighted, Councillor Hagman, is the vagaries of primary numbers. I think Laren's paper that's just been gone through beforehand has an impact. We know that within Annan there is an increased footfall in terms of early learning and childcare with Hecklegirth and Newington and the private providers both offering quite extended hours now. and therefore that will have an impact, I think, on some of our rural schools, and I think the rural schools themselves are aware of the challenges that that creates for them. We are very much trying to support them through this process. Myself has been out, I mean, with Councillor Wilson's not here just now, but we've been out to meet with some of the schools that have been affected because of these type of issues, to look at how we can try and help them continue to sustain the numbers. What we do find in some of our smaller schools in particular is that the numbers can go up and down quite dramatically, as you've seen with Cumbertrees over a period of time. When I was a head teacher in Annan, in fact, Cumbertrees was a 3-teacher school at that point. And so therefore going down to a 1 is quite a dramatic fall over the sort of last 10 years or so. So I think it's difficult to know exactly footfall, what people will decide to do, where working patterns will be. But what we are doing, trying to do, obviously through some of the mitigation within the paper today, but also trying to support the other schools as well, to support them as they continue to have a viable foothold within their communities, because it's important that they're there to do that.
Director?
Thanks, Chair. I wonder, if I could make a general point. It's a difficult point, but a general point which I think links the last report to this report and potentially the next report. The Chair said earlier it's probably £32 million that might need to be saved over the next 2 years. I think the predictions are 46 million over the next 3 years in terms of revenue. Massive challenge. We have the highest cost per pupil in mainland Scotland. That's partly to do with, a lot to do with the rurality, but it's also partly to do with our desire to have kept schools in their communities, and that's been a good thing. But we've therefore had to be quite innovative and creative with the resource that we've got. And you remember the challenge we had with cluster headships? That was partly to do with making sure the schools remained in place, but we couldn't afford to have 115 head teachers. So all the time, I suppose what I'm saying is, and if you think about the previous report around how we're trying to be efficient in terms of the early years, because we've got the opportunity to do that. What we're trying to look at the moment in terms of how we support each of the schools that we've got. Officer, and then what's coming forward in terms of how we try to be innovative around ASL with the resources that we've got. All of the time, I would like to think that officers are doing their very best to be pragmatic and deliver for our young people and families with the resources that we've got. But sometimes we just need to be a little bit flexible and recognise that we try and be efficient where we can.
Karen?
Thanks, Chair. Again, I welcome this report, so I do, in particular because of Springfield, and John's absolutely right, it is a movable feast. One of the things with Springfield is the pressure that it's got with Gretna and the rate that it is expanding, and we're very aware, obviously, with Patrick Fleming, which is a cluster school with Springfield, it was a holding school for that as well. So I welcome the fact that we've got this at least for the next year. I think that we've had positive meetings with Gillian, so we have with some of the community members looking at Gretna and the pressure that is going to be on that, and I think that it gives us this time just to kind of see exactly where we're going with the Gretna problem, as well as perhaps the effect that that will have on Springfield School. So I do welcome that, and Gillian, thanks for the support that you've been given recently.
Willie?
Yeah, Chair, and I'm hearing members saying it's an excellent report, and I can understand that in terms of where they're reading it from and how it's mitigated against the 2-teacher schools. And then I hear Colin saying, we've got to be pragmatic in how we approach ASLs, and I think that reflects back to when Colin first came and he recognised the values of the smaller schools in maintaining that as rural schools. But what I'm looking at, I'm disappointed in the report, and Gillian will remember when I asked for the report to come forward in terms of behaviour in our schools, and a paper that was presented to the Joint Safety Committee, and that there'll be a paper, a report reflecting that, some of the figures that came out of that paper that was presented by the EIS, and really the magnitude of that in terms of the behaviour, the abusive and violent behaviour going down to primary school. And I see that as a reflection in that we don't have enough ASLs in our schools to deal with the young kids who need that additional support, no matter what their condition is, their medical condition is, and that's how it may be manifested in how they actually behave. But I don't see it here. Now, I'm looking at 3.8, a paper which sets out the refocusing or support learner service, and in terms of the magnitude, the detail that we had in that paper that was presented by the EIS, I don't see either in the previous report, this report, or the next report. And it highlights, I think there was some, if my memory serves me correctly, some 5,000 abusive and violent behaviour record, and not all is recorded.
Just to interrupt you there, Willie, obviously this refers to the next paper, so could we take that as the first question to be answered at the next paper?
Well, I don't see it in the actual detail.
Well, you've highlighted, and obviously Julian can answer that.
And it's really just around this, because there is reference to it here in 3.8, specifically looked at after children with social communication needs, including autism, support for managing challenging behaviour and violence, and statutory attendance and exclusion. I would have liked to have seen the full report, I think, with some narrative to it in terms of what the EIS presented. It's not here.
Okay, we'll raise that in the next paper. So I've got George, then Ivor, then we'll move to the recommendations. George?
I just want to touch on the subject choices issue, because that's preying on parents and pupils' minds. What I would request is that, I know that head teachers are doing this, but I think parents and young folk need a little bit more understanding of the options. I'm particularly thinking of the broad and general, which is up to third year, when everybody gets a broad general education. There are some parents and, if you like, the more ambitious pupils that feel restricted only having 6 subject choices at National 5 level, but I think the context should be explained to parents and young folk that the 4 to 6 is flexible, and in my travels in my own profession and the school councils, I've met with young folk that have attained 8 National 5s, very, very clever kids. They got A's in all the 8s and asked them, did you enjoy it? And all the people, these young folk I've asked said, no, we hated it because it was just nose to the grindstone. So I think there's a degree of education that, it's not all about quantity and quality, and that if you are restricted to 6, that you've still got flexibility in the senior phase. But I do think it's educating the young folk and, importantly, their parents. Now, there's nothing wrong with offering 8, but it may not be possible in the context of the teaching profession. But I think there's an education process that head teachers and the council might do well to get across, so that the head teachers aren't getting harangued by angry parents who want 8 subject choices. And at the next level, I think we discussed this at the last committee meeting, the Dumfries Learning Town will give us an idea of how we can offer extra hires, foundation apprenticeships, things like that, also Dumfries and Galloway College. And in these schools, they're trying to be pragmatic and offer advanced hires that they can't do within the school, but it will come with a cost. And it will come with a time resource cost. So I think we need to learn from that, so as we can offer these kids all the opportunities that they might think they deserve, but be pragmatic about it. And I think the Dumfries Learning Town is a good place to start, but obviously the logistics is more difficult in other regions.
Thanks, Chair. No, I totally agree in terms of communication with parents about the choice 6, 7, 8, whatever the decision had been. What I think was disappointing was the level of national debate on that, because it seemed to revolve around whether this was to do with cuts and resources, whereas actually it was very much an educational decision, that people felt that 666 was a better set out for the young people. We've never insisted across Dumfries and Galloway on a particular model, and schools have taken local decisions there. However, if you look across the country, there's a wee bit of debate just now around whether 6 or 7's the kind of optimal level, and we're reviewing that at the moment. But there certainly needs to be some further discussion around that, because it's not just the case that it's a good thing to do 8, which is what I think you're saying. Yep.
Finally, Ivor?
Chair, I think what we have to get out the message here as well is the fact that we are putting mitigation in this year, but we won't have that flexibility next year. You've mentioned the fact that 32 million over the next 2, or 46 was it over the next 3. So I think schools need, and parent councils need to realise that if the same situation happens next year, because we've brought it in early, you know, at budget time, we're giving them a year to get ready for if there is an issue next year. They need to realise that we won't be back looking at mitigation, because we just can't afford it.
Yeah, that's a very good point, and you know, I would hope that we weren't facing the budget cuts which we are, and given the way that Boris Johnson and Jeremy Hunt seem to be magicking billions out of nowhere, really we shouldn't be facing these problems, but unfortunately we are, I think, once this election's out of the way. So can we move to the recommendations? Can we note 2.1, 2.2, can we agree 2.3, 2.4, and note 2.5? So moving on to agenda item 8 on page 269, supporting learners, refocusing on the service, update number 1. This report gives update on progress with the refocusing of the supported learner service, a report we expect following the committee in May. The report focuses on the framework that defines a new way of working with a focus to prioritise activity and decentralised management arrangements. This will maintain the allocation of pupil support hours. Hugh Smith and Clay Armsworth are here to answer any questions on the report. Is there anything you want to add to the report, Hugh?
Not particularly, Chair. Just to introduce formally Claire Armsworth, who is a principal teacher for additional support needs and has been working very closely with the team on the stages of intervention framework, which we've included as the appendix for the report.
Thanks, Hugh. Dick?
Thanks again, Chair. Yeah, on page 269 there's the amount of learning assistant hours, and it looks like it's been steady and going up slightly, but that might not be obviously meeting the increased needs in schools. But we don't seem to be managing communication with parents very well. Because about a month ago, before the school holiday broke up, they were approached by a number of parents who had been told by schools that their support was going to be cut this year, and it's specifically centred around children that would have to spend more time in Lantern centres, but maybe an opportunity for Hugh to say something on that.
Thank you, Councillor, for the opportunity. Absolutely, and it was very disappointing that a number of parents in a very small number of schools, less than 5, had actually the anxiety that was caused with the messages that had been given to them. We addressed that with the schools. And we actually reminded schools that it would be helpful if they would come and talk to us before talking to parents if they felt their allocation wasn't appropriate. We were therefore able to have those discussions, and we've been able to make adjustments where necessary, but also to remind schools that a number of schools where information would suggested that the allocation had gone down, that actually the allocation had gone up. I think the figures that you referred to indicate that actually the council has been able to protect the resources that's being developed, that's in schools. And I think that sometimes the nuance of the reality of an allocation process with a fixed amount is that actually for a school, and we have one school that has an extra 100 hours next session, for that school to go up, actually we're looking at where needs have changed in other schools, and that will mean that sometimes their allocation will go down. I think you're absolutely right in terms of our ongoing communication with parents. We have the parent forum involved in a review group, but I think that we could do more to make sure that we're engaging directly with parents around the allocation process, which we are looking to change, and we'll be coming back to members to report in more detail in future months.
Thank you. Dick?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, going on to the report, there's some really good things in this report, as the Director said, to use the resources we've got to meet the needs of the kids, and there are some good recommendations as far as the most vulnerable children in their learning centres, for example, and recognising the specialist roles which some learning assistants have to go to in providing care on a daily basis for the kids, especially in changing the children and handling and lifting them. They're very responsible roles, and we're sort of recognising that. So for the very most vulnerable children, I think we're doing well, but it's for for the large majority of kids who are in the classrooms, I'm still concerned about them. As Councillor Scobie said earlier on, it's the ones that need support in the classrooms, that have got moderate learning difficulties, maybe just on the autistic spectrum, have dyslexic needs. My impression is they're still going to be struggling in the classroom. They need differentiated materials, but we don't have the capacity. The class teacher doesn't have the capacity to support them. What more can we do to support the large number of kids that are going to be struggling without support in the
Hi, I'll answer that one, please, if that's okay. The stages of intervention document as it looks, we hope it isn't a document but more a guidance for staff so that they can, rather than answer to specific need, specific labelled need, they'll be able to kind of work through action points that they could establish and establish early so we can meet needs early, that we can overcome barriers to learning.
Apologies, Willie, I forgot. I said you could come in first. So, something to the previous.
I suppose just to add to that, Chair, if that's okay, that I think absolutely what we're recognising at the moment is that with nearly 50% of our children being identified through our matrix of need process, that actually the majority, 50% of our children are identified as having some form of barrier. Majority of those children, their support is in the classroom by their teacher, delivering the teacher's responsibilities around support, differentiating the curriculum, meeting those needs. What we've tried to do with the stages of intervention is be more clear about that, so that actually we're clear, what are we building on when we're putting in additional support? So what we don't see at the moment, which is at times, I think, that an expectation that almost that the solution to a barrier to need is an additional member of staff, somebody coming in. When we know that the international research tells us that learning assistants create barriers to learning, that children with additional support needs actually need more access to teachers, less access to other people. So this is about us trying to slow that process down in terms of let's get a good assessment, let's make sure that actually that we're doing all that we can in the classroom. And just going back to an earlier point about speech and language therapists, they say to me all the time is that actually, look, we're being brought in too early. We're being brought in when actually you haven't looked about how you make this classroom adaptable for the child's needs. And we're coming in and having to do that when actually we need to be doing the specialist assessments for those children that are moving to stage 3, stage 4. So this is all about making sure we get the right supports at the right time and actually making sure fundamentally that the majority of our children are getting the support in the classroom through their classroom teacher.
Willie?
Yeah, Chair, with it repeating all that I said previously, then I'm disappointed because I'm not seeing it. And it wasn't just for me, because I have seen the document. Hugh has seen the document that was presented by the EIS, and it did show the magnitude of the problem, so be it that there was no narrative attached to the document that was presented. And I think it's for members to see just how severe the issue is in terms of how it manifests itself in the school with the children who may need that additional support, and it's reflected in how they behave in the school. And to what Hugh has just said there, in terms of reconfiguring and all the rest, we need to see the outcome of that before we can be confident that it is working or it will work, rather than just say, right, let's reduce it by £706,000 for additional support needs, and yet we don't see what's going to be put in its place. So in mitigation, I would have liked to have seen a lot more, and I put that at full council, recognising indeed what you've said and what Colin says in 32 million for the next 2 years and 46 over 3 years. We're facing the effect of austerity and a council tax freeze since 2007. And this is the real effect of what it is here in what we're seeing in education. And if Ross recalls the last parent council we attended at the secondary school, then we did hear from someone who was affected by her child requiring additional support needs, where they were not receiving a timetable, they were not included in the general curriculum. They were being kept in, if you want to call it a learning support, the unit, rather than being included in classes that were appropriate to their ability and to reach their maximum potential. And in my opinion, that's all because we don't have the required number of additional support for learners in the schools. And while the numbers, the hourly numbers, may not have decreased any, the demand has increased. And we haven't reflected that. And what we've got is that this new configuration is going to deliver in terms of that it should be the teacher and everyone else that's dealing with this. And I don't see it in this report, nor do I see the mitigation in terms of redressing that £706,000 that was taken out of additional support needs. And I don't see the evidence to say that the outcomes are going to be, this. We're on a lick it and see that it's going to deliver, and I don't think that's good enough. What could be levelled, and we have children who are not at school, across, and from what I'm hearing from other members, across Dumfries and Galloway who are not at school because they've lost the confidence, and we may be failing these kids in terms of their educational needs and GIRFEC, if you like, getting it right for every child. And I think we've got to recognise that, but we need to see that detail of what EIS has presented.
Thanks, Chair. I'll ask you to answer the wider questions, but I think on a very specific point, but it's quite an insightful one. The new head teacher at the school that you're speaking about, it's very, very clear that there was no need for a lot of those young people not to be out in the mainstream classes. It wasn't to do with resources. So quite often it's quite complex, and it's about leadership approaches within schools. We do know the resources are an issue, but it's not the only issue. It is also about attitudinal issues in our schools in terms of getting the very best out of our teachers in terms of inclusiveness, but we still recognise it's a major challenge.
Okay, thank you. I'd start, if that's okay, Councillor Scobie, with the EIS paper that was produced, and that was produced based on information that was provided by from CIMS, and it was all incidents of behaviour. And I suppose my first point would be, and I did raise this at the Joint Safety Council, that I am concerned that we conflate behaviour and violence and aggression, and we need to be really careful. So those figures, and we did report in general on this in the last committee report in May. There was a large section in terms of behaviour in schools, but when we looked at that information that had been provided and we analysed it by one secondary school, and it took an afternoon to do that because you're having to go through the amount to actually analyse what those individual incidents were. Majority of those incidents were, well, actually, first and foremost, there was double counting. So actually, we immediately, for that one secondary school, which was one of the highest secondary schools, it was reduced by 50%. When we looked at actually what those majority of those issues were, it was disruptive behaviour. I'm not suggesting, and I'm not making little or light of these behaviours, but I think we risk conflating and creating anxiety again for families and children that are heading towards school or are moving to secondary. That was disruptive behaviour, refusal to carry out instruction, failure to follow class behaviour code, insolent or offensive behaviour. That we know that we have different schools that have different thresholds and different tolerances. We also know, as we reported at the last committee in May, that actually the approach that the Scottish Government have asked us to take and Education Scotland are pursuing with all schools and school inspections is a change in the way that we manage our schools and the ethos in schools, moving from behaviour policies to relationship policies, where actually the leadership drives expectations of all about how we behave and how we hold ourselves to build capacity in children to be able to self-regulate rather than being externally told, do this and do that. It's a long drive to get there. I'm not suggesting that's straightforward, but actually as an approach, the Education Authority has taken that absolutely on board, and we now have our better behaviours, better learning approach, which is absolutely about addressing those very behaviours that I've described in terms of the large numbers that the EIS report had captured. What we know is fundamentally children behave if they're engaged in learning. That's get the curriculum right and you don't see those behaviours. And we see that across schools, not just in Dumfries and Galloway, across Scotland. So that's what we're trying to address. I have to say that putting that information as it was shared at the Joint Safety Committee, I don't think that's very helpful. I think it creates a false perspective in terms of what's going on in our schools. And when we did that analysis, didn't feel that it was clear that actually the headline figures that were being used did not capture the reality of what was going on in our schools. So that was why they were reported at last committee, and it was referenced, the EIS information, we didn't actually share that, we didn't bring that information because obviously that's because of the sensitivity of it, not the sensitivity, just because of actually it's not correct. It needed that more detail analysis.
Yeah, can I come back, Chair? I'm grateful for what the explanation being given by Hugh and the need to be really careful. I think we said that at the Joint Safety Committee, and indeed if the media got a hold of it, you know, it could have a field day. And it needed some narrative, but it needed to be brought back so that the other members could have seen, not just heard, but could have seen, you know, with, if you look, like what you regard as false perspective being addressed. I think that needed to be because we're facing exclusions, or we could be facing exclusions in primary schools. So I think it needed to be brought. And on the point that Colin, so I still would look for those figures to be shared with members so they have a full understanding and what the EIS and other trade unions are concerned about. But in terms of what Colin said, in there being a new teacher at Stranraer Academy, and that's correct. But we haven't got a new teacher in all the schools through at Dumfries and Galloway. So any failure in the past, then we should be taken seriously, because in 3.3.1 it does refer to this approach will target, and this is the new configuration, this approach will target support at key areas including children with profound and complex needs, care experience, and that's looked after children's social communication needs, including autism, support to manage challenging behaviours and violence, and statutory attention and exclusion responsibilities. That's what we should be looking for. That's what we should have been looking for. Not to have parents, you know, saying, you know, I'm going to withdraw my child from school because I'm no longer any confidence in the school. We are failing when that happens. You know, and I do, and I was at the last parent council meeting when the head teacher did introduce herself to the parent council, and she did refer to it when the parent was making the points as to the failures. And we got to address those. And if it's by additional support needs, and that's what we need to be doing, if the reconfiguration does not deliver that, then we've got to come back and look at it. And we have nothing here before us to say, this is the new dawn, this is the new reconfiguration, and this is how it's going to impact, and the outcomes are going to be different. Until we see that in practice, you know, I'm not totally confident it's going to work.
Well, that's the intention of this being the first update. Obviously, there's going to be a follow-on update from then. When's that diaried for? Do we know? September. So obviously, we'll have further information coming back then. I've got Robert, then George.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, would I be right in thinking that your working group will address the roles and responsibilities of the class teacher, the additional support for learning teacher, the pupil support teacher, the named person? I think it would be helpful to have a wee bit of clarity on the responsibilities of those key roles. And would that be perhaps part of the working group remit?
Thank you. Absolutely. We've got a year effectively that we're suggesting about, which is implementing the new framework. So in that year, it is about being clear about roles and responsibilities, absolutely, and a bit clearer demarcation around that. That'd be fair.
We've also started with other stakeholders, our secondaries, primaries, learning centres. We have had representatives to make an initial start, but yes, as you has said, the idea is to ensure that everybody's part of it, so it's actually a usable kind of document or kind of guidance that everyone can use.
First of all, just I don't want to embarrass you, but your comments are very, very, very sound. I think absolutely first class. I sit on Hugh's working group, and I missed too many meetings because of other commitments. But the one thing that highlighted it, I was 5 years of the National Parents Forum, and it's a slightly different cohort of children than Richard's talking about. And it's a larger cohort, and it's what we call the ghost children, and it's kids that don't cause disruption, that sit there and they don't want noticed. If there's disruption, they're unsettled. And I really support your idea that a lot of this should be resolved in the classroom. Where I think there may be solutions is to identify teachers that have got a particular skill or aptitude for empathy. Because some teachers are fantastic teachers of the subject, but they don't have the empathy. They don't spot the children. Because these children are going to ask for help, and they'll drift through school and do okay. And I'm going to Asperger's, or they may have some bit of Asperger's, all the rest of it. And I hold my hands up, I've got 2 kids like that. But I was very fortunate that I know the teachers, so I can speak to the teachers and we can communicate. And that was a huge asset because I had that ability to communicate reasonably with the teachers. And the teachers that were able to help my children had huge empathy. They understood the problems and they reacted to the problems as best they could in the constraints that they've got. And it may be that some kids that are quiet and anxious just need a little bit more one-to-one. I also attended head teachers get together on relationships. It was exceptionally good. And it is about relationships. Kids that just go through school and never get noticed, something's gone wrong with the system here. And there's a lot of kids like that don't have anything that they can put a tab on, but they've got a great deal of problems. And that relies on teachers having the time and the aptitude and the incentive actually to seek out the problems that these kids have got. But for me, as a measure of raising attainment, that's got massive potential because there's so many kids in that position that don't reach their potential, either because the teachers don't have the time or the inclination to actually build up relationships with these kids. And it may be that these kids spend 10 minutes in the classroom, and the teacher's given their presentation, and then they go elsewhere where they're more comfortable. But we need to be more flexible, and I think schools are adapting to that. And I know my own school, they're looking at all sorts of ways where they can support kids. But as before, it's a big major issue that might just get lost because quite rightly we're focusing on kids with very recognisable needs. But there's a lot of kids there that don't have such an obvious problem. But I think Hugh's on the right track, so pull it to your elbow.
Thanks, George. I've got Adam, and then Rob, and then we'll move to the recommendations.
Thanks, Chair. Unfortunately, I don't sit in the Joint Safety Committee, but it sounds like I maybe wish I was there whenever that report was discussed. I'm sure that we can challenge the quantitative data that was in the EIS report, which I think I've had sight of. But I'm sure, while the figures might not have been accurate, there would maybe have been actually some qualitative analysis where actually there would be something to look at there, because teachers and parents have raised concerns with me about some things that have happened. But there is some good news in there because while there has been, in my school, some unfortunate incidents, there has been some learning experiences and there has been some dramatic turnarounds very quickly with new initiatives. And I think in 3.3.8, one of those initiatives I think is reflected in one of my schools, and I just want to make sure that we have actually done a mapping exercise of exactly, what young people do we think are going to need this facility, but is there actually already some instances where this is being catered for in some schools and they're maybe using a PEF funding or DSM funding to pay for that, and have we looked at all the facilities that are available and have we made sure that they're all going to work together? I think there were just one thing, if I'm correct in saying earlier on in a question who you said that there's been research done that says that learning assistants create barriers to learning. I think that's what you said. And I think we just have to be very careful about that because, academics will answer a question. They won't look at the whole situation because a number of I've never ever spoke to a teacher who said a learning assistant is a barrier because learning assistants perform many roles. Some of that, they provide a nurturing role, whereas, a growing number of children are receiving that nurture at home and learning assistants can provide that role. Learning assistants can help to include some of our young people with complex needs in a mainstream classroom. So I think that, while they maybe are a barrier to learning facts and figures and information, there may be actually not a barrier to including young people in education. We have to be very careful about, listening to that research and looking at it in depth. I think just a final point I want to make, I do welcome this new initiative, but at the beginning of this year, I had spoken to a number of education officers about trying to get a strategy for additional support for learning, to make sure that, You know, we're seeing more complex behaviours in schools that aren't always dealt with, but I think that we're learning how to deal with them. We need to work with teachers and head teachers to say, you know, you're saying that 50% of our young people, you know, are on that sort of matrix need. The majority of those young people will be met within the classroom, they'll be met with targeted interventions which happen in our schools, but those more complex needs are a bit more difficult to deal with and are not always manageable in a classroom setting, especially in some of our urban schools that, you know, have full classes of 33 kids. You know, if you've got 2 that are disruptive, it can be disruptive for the whole class. And I think that, you know, very much I was keen to see a new strategy to bring a lot of our policies together to make it easy for teachers and for parents and for pupils to know exactly, you know, where we stand, but also to make sure that we catch those complex needs. And I'd be keen to see a strategy like that developed. I think that the beginning of it is here, but I think that we need to see that type of strategy developed.
Thank you. Just to say, absolutely, and agree with you. I suppose my first point would be that the research, it is internationally validated research, and I suppose that the issue is about that. You're absolutely right. A learning assistant fulfills many roles, and that's why we want to trial and use some of the mitigation fund that was identified through full council to trial a different approach in our learning centres where we've got children with profound and complex needs to look at. And actually, our non-teaching unions absolutely support the approach that look at different roles of Band 3, Band 5 and Band 7s, because we're asking learning assistants to focus on assisting learning, removing barriers to learning. But reality is we're asking learning assistants to do all sorts of, to be a healthcare provider, to be a respite provider, to be a learning support provider as well. So we want to take that opportunity to try and differentiate those roles a bit more and a bit more effectively. In terms of our strategy, I suppose we have been trying to develop the infrastructure or the parts of that, and the key part for us is this stages of intervention. And you're absolutely right, we need to put some context and narrative around that, but we want to make sure that actually it's as simple and straightforward as possible, as any member of staff, as any parent can see, where do I think my child is, who do I have a conversation with, what do I need in terms of being able to access that support. That's the direction of travel that we're going. In terms of the children with really complex needs, and I think it would be reasonable to say that we have reported over the last year and a half to this committee that actually we are seeing an increasing number of children in primary school that are nowhere near ready to learn when they come through the school gate, that they are distressed, they are angry, they're upset, and they're communicating that through levels of violence, and I'd say that we haven't experienced previously. And many head teachers will talk about, I can't exclude, but I need to exclude. We need to think of the plans not working for this child. We need to put a different safety plan in place. Our risk assessments are highlighting that actually there are children that our schools and our learning centres aren't safe to support, both for them, for our other children and for our staff. And that's where we're trying to develop that alternative model. But it is a bit piecemeal, is the reality. We started in Park Primary 5 years ago with the centre there for children with autism. That's been incredibly successful. We're trying to develop something as more of an inclusion hub in St Teresa's and taking the opportunity of that space to develop that. And then where do we go from there? We then look to see what we can do next. The capacity with 700,000 at the centre has reduced, so we're looking at what we can do and how we can move forward as opportunities arise. But in terms of the overall picture, we've got a clear direction of travel. I think you're right, we need to come back in September with a clearer communication of what that looks like. And I think Councillor Scobie's point about performance is absolutely, and we just refer to everybody to 3.6, which focuses on that actually additional support for learning is part of our performance framework for education services, and we have to report that. We do need to have more measures of success, both in terms of the overall picture for those children, for all our children, but also in terms of delivering this shift and this change of strategy for the service.
Thank you. Finally, Rob.
Thank you, Chairman. Hugh, 2 quick questions. In 3.3.2, I think the 3-year allocation cycle strikes me as being very welcome. It refers to staffing continuity, but also flexibility. Those are obviously 2 somewhat conflicting priorities, so quite difficult to juggle those. How do you envisage that happening in practice, particularly when clearly numbers of children and numbers of children with particular needs can change from school to school, as can the overall populations? Second question, just very briefly, 3.4, welcome what you're proposing in relation to working with health colleagues in terms of learning centres. When do you envisage that we might be able to get an update on that in particular?
apologies. After my diatribe, I wasn't hearing properly. So I didn't quite catch your first question, but if I can, I'll try and answer your second question first. It's ongoing work with colleagues in health. I referred to earlier about speech and language. That's just part of a wider piece of work that we're working with our colleagues in terms of the all supports that are going into our schools, and particularly specifically our learning centres. I don't think we're going to be ready to come back in September for that, but I would hope and anticipate that we'll be coming back in September on the speech and language, but on the wider approach, I would want to really discuss that with colleagues in health, because they would need to be going to health board as well in terms of any modelling that we've got. But they are on the same page as us, both in terms of we've no money, but also actually we need to do something different, because we can't keep stretching the resources that we've got in ways that aren't actually making the biggest impact for children. So I think that we've got a way forwards. The research, the work that we did looking at one particular learning centre has really highlighted, just an example was that our therapists were saying, from a health board, were saying, we find it amazing at times that we will go in to do some work with the child, and actually we'll find that the child's not well enough for us to do that work with them in the learning centre. And yet they're in the learning centre. So if they're not well enough for us to be doing that therapy with them, should they be? But we know that the impact of them not being there, the impact that has on the parent in terms of respite. So it's really complicated, I suppose, and multifactorial. But we would be, maybe by the end of the year, we would be able to come back with that report, if that's okay. And your first question, sorry, was about 3.2.
So the first one was about 3.3.2, the 3-year allocation cycle. So I welcome it. It talks about balancing staffing continuity and flexibility. Obviously, those are two difficult things to balance. How do you see that working in practice, I guess, particularly in the context of your end-of-term concerns when decisions are made and being communicated in whichever direction?
You're asking the really hard question, and we've got a kind of a year to work that out in detail. We've got the principal approach, and that our schools are happy with that. We currently have a process that every fortnight we meet and we look at additional support and requirements. And that's as a central team. What we would like to be doing is trying to devolve that within the clusters for schools collectively to start to think about. We know needs change and needs can become greater, but actually for many children, the August to October is a real pressure point when actually you need to, probably with children coming in for the first time, to help them establish routines, to give them that support. That needs can then change, but at the moment our model is almost that staff become fixed. So it's a looking about how schools can be more flexible and clusters can be more flexible. But it's a good point, and we will come back hopefully with a clearer answer when we've done some more of that work with our partners, the schools.
If we can move to the recommendations. Can we note 2.1? Sorry? What? Oh.
Sorry, Chair. Just on 2.1, and well, I'm not going to oppose not to note the progress made, although I'm not seeing it, but to add to that one and to look for an audit of the ASN from the schools as to how the reconfiguration is working. To add that to 2.1, and I'm not putting a time scale on it, but I think Hugh's saying they're meeting on a fortnightly basis. He's coming back in September. October is a crucial date. I think that we need to look at all the schools and seek an audit from those schools as to how ASN is working in their schools, and we as an education authority should be looking for that. I'm happy to move, Chair.
I suppose, Chair, that the challenge with that is that, and I think we've referenced that in the report, that we are looking at this next year for these changes to actually to happen and to embed. So we have our overall current, in terms of performance measures. We intend to be coming back to committee regularly, to the new committee next session, to be making sure that you keep getting these updates. But in terms of being able to, the overall, we won't have devolved our staff until this time next year. We won't have moved to the 3-year cycle until this time next year. There are a lot of things that we won't be. We're reporting on individual components, and I suppose that's the point about needing to have this all pulled together in one clear plan, I suppose, in a sense that gives members sight of where are we at in each of these stages. We do report on this through Pentana, but actually maybe we need to be a little bit more clear about some of these strands so that members can follow that progress.
Yeah, I think the worry would be the risk around taking officers away from the developments that need to happen in order to audit something prematurely. So I think our consideration would be that, of course, it's in members' hands, but that an audit may not be very valuable to you in a few months' time before we've embedded any of the work available.
Yeah, I think given that we will have regular reports coming to this committee, I think the appropriate time to have an audit of that time is when it's actually being brought in, so possibly at this committee this time next year. Adam?
I think an audit in any form is a very extensive piece of work for something that we're actually discussing the implementation of. I think maybe what would be more useful is Hugh said there'd be a report to the next meeting of education and learning. Maybe actually what would be useful is actually to at that point implement some KPIs about, you know, what's the timescales for implementing some things that Hugh has just discussed, and maybe that would be more valuable for members, because actually it wouldn't be an audit as such. It would actually be reviewing the timescales and reviewing the progress made at committees, you know, and maybe it would be that implementation of KPIs at that stage that would be more valuable.
Hugh?
We have just been reviewing our plan that's currently on Pentana and actually and adjusting, and well, we intend to adjust that with the additional support contribution, loan support contribution to the Education Services Business Plan, which actually has these actions in that, and that would be where we would be putting milestones in to be able to report in terms of progress of those being delivered. That also has the risk register, and then I think it's a challenge for us with 50% of our children having a matrix, actually, you know, general exclusions, attendance, and attainment levels. That's a key measure for us, as well as for those children with more profound needs. But absolutely, I think we're working on that over the summer in terms of Pentana, so that should be able to be a report that's produced that would give members that reassurance, and then obviously be able to look at that regularly. And we do report to senior management team, senior leadership team as well on a regular basis in terms of that. So there is, I think, quite a degree of oversight, but we can bring that back to committee.
Yeah, I think it is essential to make best use of officer time. We don't want you to be at a time when, you know, we are losing more and more staff from the centre, that we make the best use of the staff which have left. Finally, Dick?
I think you've got to know where you're starting from. So we need the starting point where we are. We've got an audit of need across the authority of what the needs of the children are, but we also must know what we're supporting now at the moment. So I think that's all that Councillor Scobie's asking for, what the need is and what we're doing at the moment to meet that need, and how that's happening in the schools. So I think that information should be there at the moment. You can't make a plan unless you've got the information where your starting point is.
Well, I think we do know where we are. It's a question of where we're getting and how efficiently and how quickly we get there. Willie, finally?
Yeah, it's the mover, Chair, and I'm not too sure if we do know where we are, and given a report that I heard, and Ross was at that meeting, from a parent at the parent council meeting. So I'm not asking for senior officers. I'm saying my inclusion in that is, and to look for an audit of the ASN from the schools. So let's hear for the schools as to how the reconfiguration is working or going to work. And I think, you know, as the hybrid committee that's taken the decision to withdraw £6,000 from it, and what the impact is, I think we should hear from the schools as to how that's going to work. And I take heart with what Colin said in terms of the new teacher, and I hope it does work, and that we do implement it. But we have failed, in my opinion, up to now, and we've got to make sure that we are moving forward and it's in the right way. So I would move that as the addendum to that 2.1, Chair.
I don't really see the point in going down that route, Willie. I think it just utilises resources which would be better used elsewhere, so I'm quite happy to... we quite often do, Willie. Yeah. Okay, so I'm happy to move that we note the recommendation 2.1 as it is.
I've moved it.
I've seconded Councillor Scott.
Okay, we'll waste everybody's time then, shall we? Shall we go to a vote?
Well, it's no wasting my time.
Chair, I'll second your moving 2.1.
Thank you.
Just to be clear, Councillor Scobie, is your motion just regarding 2.1 then? Are you? What about 2.2 and 2.3? Are they to be as is? Okay, right. Motion then proposed by Councillor Scobie, seconded by Councillor Brodie, and the recommendations in the report was recommendation 2.1 to be amended to look at an audit for ASM from the schools and how that configuration would work, and amendment proposed by yourself, Chair, seconded by Councillor Wilson, and recommendations in the report. So going to the vote then. Chair.
Amendment.
Vice Chair.
Amendment.
Councillor Brodie.
Motion.
Councillor Campbell.
Amendment.
Councillor Ian Crothers.
Motion.
Yeah. Councillor Davidson.
Amendment.
Councillor Dempster.
Amendment.
Councillor Hagman.
Amendment.
Councillor Hislop. Councillor Little.
Amendment.
Councillor McKee. Councillor Scobie.
Motion.
Councillor Stitt.
Amendment.
Councillor Tate. Councillor Wilson.
Amendment.
And that's the church reps. Robert McQuiston. Timothy Burrell. Sam Scobie. Thank you. Three. Amendment is carried 11 votes to 3 with 3 abstentions.
Thanks, Claire. You'll be pleased to hear I have no other item of urgent business, so have a good recess, apart from those of you who are on Police, Fire and Rescue, which meets tomorrow, I think. And we'll see you at the new committee in September. Right, thank you.